Wonderful. Well, I have to say, I absolutely, I hadn't, dude, have we crossed paths before? Because I can't recall coming across you on social media or anything like that. And your book kind of came out of nowhere. And I get people asking me to write a endorsement for them fairly often. And I'm like, oh, dude, I have so many to do. I struggle to read the books I have to. And I've got to be honest, if I didn't see the endorsements that had already been written, I'd have been like, and it's the fact that I was like, dude, every single page I turned, I was like, there's so many endorsements in every single one. I'm like, I love these people. These are my people.
No doubt.
And so, yeah, I mean, I started reading the book and I just got grabbed. It's a fantastic book. And so I'm already telling people, I was telling people last night, I was like, guys, this book's coming out in a week or so and you better get on it because it's fantastic.
I really appreciate that.
I'm really excited because there's not that many great resources, you know, there really isn't.
There's not. There's just a couple that are very explicit about this journey, especially getting into the nuances and nuts and bolts. But, you know, I read Brian McLaren's A New Kind of Christian almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so yeah.
Which is fantastic, but it's a totally different concept as well to some degree. I'm really excited. I'm hoping to talk to Brian in a few weeks because I've not seen him for a couple of years, but I feel like there's a danger in conflating all people that are in this journey of deconstruction with the progressive church movement, which it is not. You know, some people move through that path, and some people even settle there. But a huge portion of people, that's not what they're looking for at all. It's just another form of fairly rigid Christianity. It's just another side of a rigid coin.
It's just a hipper. It's a hipper, more progressive.
Absolutely. Well, it's the left and right, quote unquote, or it's the liberal to the conservative to the whatever. But it's still a very, dualistic.
He's actually coming out with a book. I was talking with him and coming out with a book in 2021 on this topic of some kind of deconstruction, reconstruction, although the title of his book has to do with doubt. But then Jennifer Knapp is coming out with a book on this topic as well in the next year about. So it's just everyone's doing it, but it's different. It's a different season, different. You know, the sociologists are, the term is de-churched or done. So they are trying to give a specific label to a specific group of people.
Yeah. But even in that, I've talked to quite a few sociologists because what I'm doing, I'm actually doing quite a lot of research for a local research company here in the UK. And looking at researching people that are identifying as deconstructed, but talking to, I don't know if you've come across Packard. Yeah, he wrote a great book.
He's an endorser. Yeah.
Okay, so talking to, actually, I did see his name. So but like the thing is, de-churched is not necessarily deconstructed. There's a big overlap where a lot of people deconstruct and they are not either free to leave their church, they don't desire to leave their church, or they have found a church that facilitates deconstruction on some level. There are churches, especially if the pastor deconstructs and manages to bring people with him. And so there's this weird gray area where there's plenty of people that maybe psychologically have disconnected from the church a little bit. They're still there. They're stuck with their wife and their kids, or they're the pastor, or, like whatever. And so there's all these different brackets, right? The dones, the nuns, the nomads. You had a great list of all these different names.
And that, you're so right, because it does an injustice to the complexity of people's lived experiences when we put a label on them. Yeah. So de-churched is one label that Josh Packard in his work is using, but as you just mentioned,
which is great work as well. I don't mean to. I think it's fantastic. That group.
Absolutely, and you're right to say that. Under that umbrella is, and I think Kathy Escobar uses different terms, and Kinnaman's work from the Barner Group, sort of the subcategories, right? The nomads and the exiles and all these different. So it's complex.
No, the company I'm working with in the UK is a company called IDO Research. They're probably the kind of like up and coming direct competitors for Barna, because really in the UK, Barna is it. And there's not many people that are faith-based research that's happening. And so they're an up and coming research company. I'm just very lucky that I'm very close to the director of their company. So I was like, right, guys, I want to start doing this. I want to start working on it. I've got a network of at least 1,000 people that are keen to be doing research. They're like researchers. And so we're slowly building that as a study. But my heart is not to hone down who are these people and kind of put them in a box, but actually it's almost to actually blow that box wide open and go, look at what we're looking at here. There is, I just put out our first piece of information. And what's fascinating is, we looked at church attendance and we mapped to, I don't know if you've come across the religious faith development scale. So it's been developed for about 30 years. It was rooted in James Fowler's work, and then it's kind of evolved over the years. And I think Irene Harris was the person that did it with someone else. She's a sociologist, maybe psychologist, sociologist, that kind of world. But she looks at the psychology of faith and how it impacts different things. And so what we initially theorized in our study was, can we look at the religious faith development scale, which maps people's faith kind of from a baseline to a more progressive, not progressive as in left liberal leaning, but just in that they become more open in their faith and explore and more intentional in how broadly they explore it. Can we map these people that are going on this journey on that scale, and can you then associate those with different things? And so what we found was, across this group that's saying they're deconstructed, there was loads of people that still attended churches. It's very different to evangelical, but it's very similar to like mainline Protestantism, Catholicism, Orthodox, had roughly the same kind of church attendance as deconstructed Christians, apparently. But what's interesting is, as you look at their faith development, as they develop their faith more, you see their church attendance just plummet off a cliff. It just disappears at certain points. And so there's certainly some dynamic of the further along you go, the more you start to go, this isn't working for me, which is really interesting. And so we even mapped that to their comfort levels as well. So how comfortable do you feel in church, which was the same thing. It's fascinating, really interesting.
So do they become the de-church then? Like those very people possible. who are deconstructing, and I'm in church, and I'm listening to Peter Enns and this podcast, and deconstructing, but then they eventually church
is the slippery slope true,
and
right?
then they are the ones Josh Packard is interviewing as.
So that's one of our hypotheses. So we're doing small, short surveys every couple of months on different topics, but we're also tracking certain baselines along the way. And so we're hoping that, over 5 years, we can start going, people here go here. On the whole, might be variations, but it's very exciting. I'm very excited about it. Really cool.
It's so wild. And I did read, it was in one of Josh Packard's articles. It wasn't in the book.
Sure.
And there was some co-authors, I forget the names, but they made this statement that I actually contacted Josh about. And it was a very skeptical, negative statement saying they suspect that in the years to come, those who are de-churched will eventually no longer even hold to a spirituality. That because there will be nothing to sustain them. There will be the rituals are gone, the structures are gone, and they perceive years down the road that eventually, because there's no kind of roots anywhere, that they won't have the necessary structural resources to maintain their roots in especially in the Christian faith, more specifically. What
do you think about that?
I contacted him about that because I said, man, do you believe this? He didn't. Now, apparently it was one of the co-authors. It was encouraged to put in there for whatever reason, but he made a comment to the effect of, how can we limit the spirit, right? How can we really say that although the structure will change, we can have hope basically that the spirit is up to good things. So that was, he left with a positive outcome.
I tried to get him on this podcast. He's busy. He's just shifted to working in a new field and he's got a lot of stuff going on. So hopefully in the future, maybe down the line, but it's intriguing to me because I think the woman that he did the church refugee book with and that paper and that study with, both of them are committed, conventional Christians to some degree. Is that right from what you understand as well? Or?
That was my hypothesis. And then
that's what I assumed going in. I've not talked to him
he read
about
my
it.
book, and then I was like, hey, Josh, are you sure? I know you're endorsing this. I'm just curious. I said some feisty things, and he didn't disagree with anything.
Interesting.
And so I was very surprised because maybe
we should get him to do the religious faith development scale.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting because I do wonder as well, because I just remember reading that book and just thinking, there's so much to watch for. I'm very conscious of this doing research. This is why I involved a research company, because my background's not in sociology, research, psychology, any of these fields, never mind the extra layer of research, which is a whole world. Just changing one thing can screw everything, just working with a scale. I was talking to them and I'm like, can we change the wording of this? I don't think deconstructed people are going to like the wording of this scale. And they're like, this scale has been developed for 30 years. It's been honed. It's been peer reviewed hundreds of times. You change the wording on it, you're going to have to start from scratch and spend about 4 or 5 years building it back up to being a credible scale. And I was like, all right, let's work with some crappy wording.
Right.
It's worth it, because I'm not spending 5 years right now, but exactly. If I build my own, I'm going to have to spend years. But hopefully, what my goal is to then build on this and create a scale that maybe is more practical. But I'm so aware of my own bias, right? So I'm from within that world to some degree, and so I'm working with it. That's one of the big things. I'm constantly going to them, going, am I making sure that I'm covering my own biases? I'm not trying to get the information I want to get. And I'm really, this is something I've seen from the data. And I don't know when you were researching for your book, if you came across this, but I look at something like Barner's research and I go, this is a bunch of very conventional Christians doing research on people that are quote unquote no longer Christian. Even the way that they categorize people often, I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's such a black and white just discrediting of an entire field and lumping everyone in with, I don't know, atheists or people that leave the church and are done. And, it feels like there's a real problem with that world of people portraying this group. It can be very poorly portrayed. Like you talked about that in your book really well, I think. I don't know if you could talk about that a bit, just in your opinions. What are some of the problems that we're having with the conventional, broader church community, Christian community, and how they perceive this group? Do you have thoughts on that? Because I know you talked about it a little bit in the book really well.
Yeah, I mean, the perception only perpetuates the marginalization of what I deem as fellow Christians, right? Just by the way we talk about people, just the way that people are. Gosh, I was just talking to somebody yesterday, and like I always think there's going to be a time where I'm just kind of accepted. I'm on the fringes in my fellow Christian community. And then I get told once again yesterday that I'm going to hell and that I'm a false prophet. And then it's my ideas are dangerous. But that's the problem is it's just, they can't, and in my best days, I think, well, that's a diversity of opinions in my family. They just happen to hold a more conservative, I hate labels, but a more literal conservative, a very certain hermeneutic that every passage of scripture in the Bible, they could take genre into consideration, but if a text says God said this or God did this, it literally and objectively happened in human history.
Yeah.
But then I say, my God, and someone wrote on this too, this has to be a virus in the mind. You're sitting there judging me. You're threatening me. My nervous system is, I could feel like I feel like I'm getting attacked. Like it would be saying like the most dangerous person in the United States is going to come after you and kill you and torture you. But now we're talking about the God of the universe.
Right, but to the nth degree.
I know. And I'm like, wow, I'm getting anxious here. Then I'm noticing, I'm into kind of mindfulness and like he's kind of a father figure. So now my nervous system is really amped up and I'm like, I kind of, do I believe what he's saying? Now I'm getting nervous. Maybe I am a false prophet, but then I'm like, no. And then I'm like, how could you threaten me that way? It's such an assault to my psyche. It's such an assault to our psyche. We are legion. We are those who the church is saying, you're heretics, you're following Satan. There's something wrong with you, right? Like, just by the way they're talking about us, as opposed to seeing us as part of the family. And maybe we're different, we're unique, but so are you. Why can't we embrace the diversity and the reality that there are 30,000 different, sects and denominations?
Yeah.
But it can't. It's just one way. This is the way. And if you don't believe this, then, and I said, so are you saying that if I don't have the right knowledge about God, that I'm going to be tortured for eternity? Like, I'm telling you, brother, that I love Jesus. I have a heart and passion for the church. I love God. I just read these verses a little different than you. So are you saying to me, yes, because you're not following his words, the true Jesus. Mark, you have an imaginary Jesus. This was just yesterday.
Wow. Dang. You're a psychologist, right? Is that right?
A licensed marriage and family therapist.
Okay. Do you work with people through these particular issues with religious kind of baggage, or is that a totally kind of separate world for you?
No, I work with all kinds of issues and concerns, and the religious concerns and issues obviously comes up not only as individuals, but I do specialize in couples work too. So seeing those dynamics come up in couples work.
Yeah, because I remember reading, I think it was in Leaving the Fold. What's her name? Marlene Winnell.
Yeah, Marlene Winnell.
I remember reading her description. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I rarely get to talk to psychologists about this kind of, or people that are within that kind of world of therapy and just dealing with people's pains, hurts, traumas.
Yeah.
I remember reading her talking about post-traumatic stress and how a lot of it is rooted in this threat that you come under. You feel a threat of your life, of your livelihood. There's a threat of injury. These kind of dynamics in place can create this huge post-traumatic stress that goes on beyond that. And I remember her saying, now, is there ever a greater threat of injury or a threat of death than the God of the universe saying, if you're wrong, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to torture you for eternity. And that just clicked for me. And I was like, wow. And this is her framework is religious trauma syndrome, which I know there's different people have different views within that being a specific diagnosis or whatever. I'm very happy to have that as the case. But I wonder what's going on there psychologically, because a lot of people that are listening to this, a lot of people that talk to me day in and day out, I'm sure a lot of people that you come across have these kind of backgrounds where that is their backgrounds, and they are talking to their friends, and it's just triggering these things. It's their voice in their head is, the God of the universe is displeased with you right now. What if you're wrong? I have people that send me messages and like, Phil, I've not believed in hell for about 12 years. And yet I wake up once or twice a week in a cold sweat because I've dreamed I got sent there. And it's like, what do you do? Like, how do people, how do you see people working through these kind of conditions and these issues? Because that's one of the, I'm always like, find someone that specializes in religious trauma, complex PTSD, something like that. But I don't know. I don't even know how to begin. I know she's got in her books and helpful exercises and things. But how would you recommend people start working on those kind of issues?
Yeah.
Or even what's going on there? What's going on within that?
Yeah, we'll talk about what's going on and then what are some helpful ways to deal with those things.
Sure.
Just as a side, Marlene Winnell's book it's good. One of my, it's not even a criticism, it's just an objective reality that her book is not very friendly towards reigniting one's faith again, right?
It's less even keeled.
It's not like Kathy Escobar's book where, it's trying to help you reconstruct your faith, but really she's coming from a strict psychologist framework who's been affected by it too. But
and she sees pretty much all kind of types of religion to some degree or another as being fairly toxic, and one needs to come out of that. Like that seems to be where she's coming from when you read through it. Sure. So great stuff. And people, there's going to be people who need that.
because I had some early readers read my book, and they said, I can't do it. It's too triggering for me. They're not sure that they want to reconstruct their faith. Yeah. And so while my book is not big on strong and saying what that faith journey should be and very kind of open that way, it was just so triggering where reading Winnell's book would be
a bit more helpful for where they're at. Yeah.
So back to trauma. Not everyone who experiences religious abuse or goes through the deconstruction, reconstruction journey has experienced trauma. So let's differentiate that. They might have gone through that, but just like an event, I have a twin brother. We went through an event together. I was traumatized. He wasn't. So people can go through the same experiences, but not have trauma reactions, not have post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, right? Not have religious trauma, so to speak. So, but those who do, gosh, we're talking about PTSD, right? We're talking about hypervigilance. We're talking about insomnia. We're talking about an inability to sleep right, or, this extra anxiety, this having issues maybe with food and, just watching around, and it's not a safe place.
Yeah. And
it's very traumatic, and hell can be traumatic. Like you said, 12 years later, I don't believe it. And that's where it's kind of like phantom theologies, right? Where somebody whose limb is cut off, it's not there, but they can have experiences as if it really is there. But for someone to have a phantom theology around hell shows how violent this doctrine is to the human soul.
Yeah.
That somebody could not even believe it intellectually anymore. But that violent belief can have such a way in one's human psyche that it can create trauma symptoms, can create nightmares for a person, a trigger, and automatically maybe someone can have a panic attack. This is very serious stuff. And I don't know how the oxygen of heaven, of freedom, of love, of truth, of gentleness, of faithfulness, of self-control, of how that has anything to do with this type of violent.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Some principles that Jesus shows us and talks about, it can feel uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong. And what's interesting is sometimes love itself can feel traumatic.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Love can be hell for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. But for some of these people, this should not.
Yeah.
There's something amiss here with this notion.
And you have a whole other dynamic as well of that, where you can intellectually be going, yeah, okay, I know this is traumatic. I know that, this is just ingrained in me. But there's a whole nother voice in there going, but what if it's God's kind of going, no, buddy, Phil, I'm trying to bring you back in. I'm trying to remind you hell's real and you're off the wrong, because even how we hear God is so interwoven with our own voice in our head, our own thoughts, that when you have those traumatic thoughts, those traumatic voices in your head, it's very hard even still to kind of disconnect from like that. It just adds a whole nother layer of possible doubts that maybe hell is, and that's how a lot of Christians would frame it, right? They'd be like, well, maybe God's trying to get your attention, or
that's why this dynamic. I mean, listen, you can bake a cake and say, man, I'm not sure if this is the right ingredient. Like I could ruin this cake, but man, if you're not right about the eternal, my God, hell, like torture, I don't know, like pitchforks, like what the hell does that even mean? For eternity, not 10 years, 20, 100,000. Eternity is a very long time.
Yeah.
So it leaves an indelible mark in the nervous system, in the body, which is why talking about how do you get out of some of this stuff, you can't talk your way out of it. And that's in line even with our field in psychotherapy. The day and age of talk therapy is coming to an end, or it'll probably be there for a while, but we're realizing that talking about things is not enough. Learning things intellectually is not enough, because trauma resides in the body, in what's called the mind body. So it's in a different part of the nervous system we have. So in other words, someone can, yeah, God loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. But in their heart, they might say, Jesus hates me. Like Jesus doesn't like me. So neuroscience even tells us now that there's a difference between what we can believe in our prefrontal cortex, our logical brain, and our implicit nervous system. So there is sort of this, you can believe one thing here, but in your body and your nervous system, you can believe something very different.
Right.
So telling people, yeah, you know what? God's not going to send you to hell. God really loves you. That can fall so flat.
Yeah.
So
and it does, right? We've all been out there trying to evangelize with that message before, and we've realized how flat it falls, because people also have all their experiences of what that look like to them. And yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what people are going to need, and there's so much to talk about, but we're on the reconstruction end. It's experiences. And this is, I mentioned the work of Memory Reconsolidation in my book, and not to get too nerdy, but the point is that we have to have experiences that change our experiences. And it's human beings and information coming from humans that have hurt us so deeply, but it's going to take, and I'm big on attachment theory, so it's going to take experiences with humans where you don't just, someone tells you about the love of God, but you're shown the love of God repeatedly. Or if you want to use the work of Memory Reconsolidation to work with trauma, for example, let's say you can't get rid of this angry, violent, punitive God. And it's there. It's you get triggered intellectually, you're kind of believing. So another kind of tool or technique to use is the principles from Memory Reconsolidation. And that's basically saying that you can take the image of the violent, punitive God and feel what that feels like. Then all of a sudden you can feel palpitations, you can feel anxiety. Part of you might want to run away. And maybe you can even think about what that God looks like. So have that experience. Then you juxtapose that with a different positive image of God, right? If this is how you choose. Or you can use a positive image of, this is how the brain works, even a grandmother. Or you can make up your own God, which is really weird. But the point is you can then feel into that experience of the love, of the connection, of the feeling safe, of that goodness quality, of the tend and befriend system activated. And then you go back to the original memory of that violent, punitive God, and actually juxtaposing that is how we get into the nuances of memory reconsolidation.
Right.
Then because we're doing that, it unlocks the memory and the emotional valiance of this punitive God, which is that negative emotional baggage. Then there's about a 4 to 5 hour window where that kind of memory can be changed, and then it becomes consolidated again. And so it's sort of juxtaposing that. It can actually change the memory. And then you can lose some of that negative emotion. Now, it sounds easier than it's
no, I mean, that doesn't sound easy to me at all. I'm not very good at these things.
I'm trying not to get too technical here. But
it does sound good on paper for sure, like you're saying.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Is this the theory? So I'm not very familiar with attachment theory and these kind of elements. But I read a book, The Body Keeps a Score, which was about trauma. I don't know if you have good or bad things to say about that. Yes, absolutely.
Standard, yeah.
And that sounds, what you were saying there sounds like a lot of what he's talking about there, where this whole kind of concept of neurons that fire together, that whole kind of concept.
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Is that kind of what we're talking about, where we're kind of going, okay, when I think of the Father, I feel this dread and fear and scariness. But can I somehow think of the Father and think this thing up here, a totally different, a peace, a calm, or whatever, and actually just reprogramming. Is that kind of what we're talking about? We're just kind of basically trying to rewire how our default responses.
In a simple way, absolutely.
Okay.
In therapy terms, one can call it corrective emotional experience, right? You're having these new experiences, and it's not just a head thing. You got to feel into these things, but activating the tend and befriend system, because we'll have a caregiving system, like we have a threat system. But if there was a baby and the baby was crying, oh, want to protect, want to care for, we have a caregiving system. And that releases oxytocin as well. So we have that nurturing system. So to put it in a simple way, I think it was Tim Desmond who said, distressing memory plus the caregiving system equals a new experience. Yeah. So if we, like you're saying, we can play with our neurons, neuronal connections, and we can have new firings and wirings and change our lived experience. Yeah. And there's different ways that you can do that.
I wonder if there's something subconsciously going on there where I'm always fascinated by people that do let go of their spirituality, which actually data is showing, like the data that I've found as I've studied this is about 75 to 80% of people that end up moving out of church being de-churched, or maybe even moving into deconstruction. 75 to 80% of them still hold on to a spirituality. Only about 20% let go of that. But what's interesting is I love, and I include those people that do leave it because I think they're important equally. But the people that do leave it, I often work with these people still, and I'm like, wow, you've decided to walk away. You're maybe you're slightly agnostic, but some of you are completely atheist, and yet you're trying to reframe. How could we read the Old Testament so that God is good and he didn't condone genocide? And I'm going, what's happening here? And I wonder on some level if people are trying to do that. They're trying to reframe and grapple with this God. Even if they don't want to believe in this God, they're like, can I at least reframe it? I'm fascinated why people want to explore that and are trying to do that when they go, I don't believe in this God anymore, but I just want to, is there a different way to look at it?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's maybe self-doubting or whether you actually, if you're just not honestly, a bit more honest with yourself and maybe you're a bit more agnostic than you think, or but it's an interesting dynamic, because that does seem to happen a lot for a lot of people that walk away. They're still, I'm kind of interested in this a little bit,
isn't it? But
have you found that as well?
I do. I mean, it's like it's like you breaking up with somebody. Oh, I'm over them, and you're checking their profile out.
Yeah, you're still stalking them on Facebook.
Right? Oh no, you don't care about them at all, right? You're done with that. So I think there's an element there where they're not done, right? And some, maybe it's like an intellectual pursuit. Some people have, they go in that direction of, it's wanting to find answers to get other people out of what they consider toxic religion. But then there's others who say, I don't believe that anymore, but they're not fully done. They're not, they still have a little bit of heart left for their lover that they don't want to fully let go. They're still in a relationship with the person that they believe they're not in a relationship with. Yeah. And it's a very interesting, and that also reminds me of the symbiotic relationship that atheists have with Christianity or liberal, people who became liberal, who they're always, looking and talking about fundamentalist Christians, and they can't let go. It's just this, and they're like, oh, I'm done with that. But then you're all about like talking to these people and trying to get them prove that they're wrong. And it's just this weird symbiotic relationship, right?
Yeah. I noticed you avoided the concept of kind of like stages of development and moved into kind of an idea of stations, which I really liked. I wonder if, would you have thoughts on certain psychological human development stages? And do you still hold to, well, of course, there are some stages that we all kind of move through as we grow and develop, but you just didn't want to apply that explicitly to this process? Because I do wonder if that's what this is, generally speaking, is it's people move from one stage into a new stage. We always demonize the stage we come from. That's usually the early parts of the next stage, is hating what you just were. And a lot of it's guilt, a lot of it's feeling shame about how could you be so stupid, or you're angry at the people because you feel they deceived you, failing to realize that you weren't deceived, and they're not deceived. They're just in this stage. Do you hold to some of those kind of concepts of there being kind of more linear kind of paths in development?
Right. In my book, I fought it, Phil. To be honest,
I love the stations. It's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah,
maybe we can talk about that as well. But
it's just something in me rebels against being boxed in. I don't like stage work, although, I mean, there's validity to it, but it just goes back to my notion that we're so darn complex that even my alluding to stations, I acknowledge that we could be at different stations that I can't even name. And so when I say, well, here are the 6 stages of faith development, it's just, gosh, people are in their 5.5, or 4.3.
Yeah.
But I'm excluding them, and I'm trying to force them into this particular mode in a stage. Yeah. So I just, part of me, I can't do it.
And even in parts, right? So like in my way I read the Bible, I'm stage 5, but actually in how I relate to God, I'm still stage 3. And right, I mean, that's just so complex even when we start limiting, because we are very diverse in the way that we frame our spirituality, and it is in lots of areas. So I keep going.
And then a lot of the stage work, it has the hierarchy almost, it's probably implicit, but this last stage of kind of union with God or something. And I'm like, that's not fair. It's not fair to people who say, I'm not going that direction, but I feel like I have evolved. I consider myself, I'm not silly enough to say I'm an atheist, because that would require to have all the data and information in the world. I could say I'm agnostic, but I have found peace with not being in the Christian religion. And so a lot of stage development work doesn't talk about that. And I don't want to exclude that and say that, well, they've devolved in some way, So that's part of my reasoning of sticking with kind of stations rather than stages where people.
That makes sense. Yeah. And that definitely is a dynamic. I found that an special limitation with Fowler's work. I really liked it, and I thought it was really helpful, for sure, and very insightful, and probably very true, much to my chagrin, but very limited and very boxed in a lot of ways, for sure.
Right.
So, it's always trying to balance that. I did a whole series on my website on spiral dynamics, is the model I kind of chose to kind of expound on, just to kind of help people see that we all grow in different ways. And this is a common way that people move along, but helping people realize that you can be at multiple stages within that at different times. We're so complex, but I do think a lot of the time that does feel like part of what's going on. If you look at a model, something like that, you've got a very traditional grouping of people that are looking for safety, certainty, security, and that sums up most of conventional Christianity in the West perfectly. In fact, probably beyond the West as well. We're looking for safety, certainty, security, and honestly, if you don't have a problem with that and you are connecting with that, that's good. I don't see a need for you to evolve to the highest level and get to the top, or that's not how I see it at all. So I think it's fine, but I do think when you step out of that and move into kind of more of a modern position where you're looking for rationality and logic, and you don't care about what's the authority. The authority is me and how I can rationalize truth, and you start to demonize the prior stages. But what do the prior stages do? They demonize you. How dare you question our authority and say that we're certain, but we're maybe wrong. And I think there is an element of just part of growing up. You look at a teenager, they don't want to hang out with their 7-year-old brother. I don't want to hang out with them, they're stupid, I think it's just a very natural kind of part of growing up, not in the sense that a teenager is better than a 7-year-old.
Right.
7-year-old's a 7-year-old, a teenager's a teenager. You wouldn't use that language. You'd probably say a teenager is better at maths than a 7-year-old, hopefully.
Right.
But it's not a better person.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, I'm intrigued by it. But I thought your choice for using stations was really very insightful, very, very, very interesting to look at that. I don't know. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit more in how you see people growing and developing in their faith through the kind of concept of having stations in life?
Yeah. So I chose stations because this is where people can hang out for a bit. And you're right to say like station one is, and I think I called it home, right? It's just where people feel certainty. And although even with that though, I think I mentioned this in the book, there's a group of people who, because of trauma, because of what we might call insecure attachment, that it actually never felt like true home, right? So they're home, but they're listening to the sermon and, well, maybe that's for him, maybe that's for them. You're never feeling fully in the in crowd, So even with that, there's complexity, right? I hate to box people in.
Yeah.
That's just my heart, right? I see boxing people in as part of this, sometimes the oppressing of human beings, boxing labels. But I think, that station of home that makes a lot of sense. And then something happens. And there's splinters in the mind, right? You start questioning something, but then you push it down, right? So there's all these different so sometimes you can push it down and then you go back home. Sometimes you push it down and it keeps popping up. And one of the stations I think is Splinterville, where it's just, I can't ignore it anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's something is happening. Now I'm questioning who God is. Now I'm questioning, are people who are gay, are they going to hell? The Bible is every word, every jot and tittle, this is too anxiety provoking. And John was doing the same thing. Geez, look what happened to John. Freaking, he left the church. They were rejecting him. He, called him a heretic. I'm going back home. Yeah. Right. Or I can't, it's just, this is happening to me. And then I make a choice at some point to move on to explore or to just be in the disorientation station where things are just, my whole inner, outer, everything is chaos. It's disorientation. I feel like I'm walking on a waterbed. And that's, man, what a place to be.
Yeah, seriously. Do you think many people manage to go back from that? Like, that's something I'm fascinated by, because I often use this common analogy in this scenario, but the concept of taking the red pill in the Matrix. Once you take it, you realize, oh, it's the Matrix. You want to go back, you want to be in the Matrix, but you go back and you're like, none of this is real. It doesn't feel right. And that is very true for, I would say, a huge percentage of people that go through this. But I'm always fascinated by the few that take the red pill and then go, I'm going to go back. And I don't know if it's just I'm not very good at empathy. I'm not very good at imagining what someone else is going on in their head and I'm like, how did that happen? Do you think that's something that people can do easily? Or do you think they're living now very uncomfortable at home? Or what do you think is going on with that kind of dynamic?
You're right. I mean, there's that picture of like a beautiful woman and a witch. And like how you see it, you can either see the witch or the beautiful woman, right? Those kind of images.
Optical illusion kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah. But once you see both, you can't go back. So I think you're right. I think for the most part, people, it's really hard to go back. But I think there are some, and as human beings, we're great at compartmentalizing. And we can put things in boxes. And I think some people just have a lot of cognitive dissonance, use defense mechanisms to just not go there and live in the box. And for various reasons, maybe, it would crush their spouse. It would be the demise of the relationship, or they're a pastor and they're in a church and, maybe they can do it for another 10 years and then, they go back to being disoriented and to a different station. But it's hard to do, but some people can do it. Yeah. I mean, we all have defense mechanisms, right? We all use them to not deal with reality. That's the whole notion of what a defense is. And some people can do it better than others. Yeah.
Well, power to them as well. I have noticed that, I guess, now, if I think about it, the reasons that people have are powerful reasons. I was part of this community for 35 years and everyone I've ever known is in this bubble. I'm going to stop asking these questions, stop reading these books, and I'm just going to keep these relationships. It's much more important to me. I'm like, wow, yeah, that sounds like a great life choice, You've only got another 20 years in life left. I mean, like, yeah, like, why not? I can't do that. And I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't. But I do know a lot of us look at that and go, oh, I would have liked to be able to go back in the Matrix, But in the Matrix, is the guy, he does go back, doesn't he? He's eating steak. He's like, I know it's not real, but my God, it tastes good. And I'm like, I want to eat the fake steak. I love that steak. I really love that steak. But it doesn't taste like steak anymore to me.
It can't. Some of us we're sensitive. And this goes into some research, and one of was like Bell's field study, like looking at German and United States deconverts.
Okay.
And looking at the sort of the profile, and like we're more, lean a little bit more towards right brain and passionate and sensitive and creative, and we're looking and want to be expansive, and like, no, I don't want to hate you because you're of a different religion. Can we both hold what we hold but still connect and love one another? And so some of us, we just can't. We can't go back to the way things are. It would literally crush our hearts. We would go into a major depression. It wouldn't be good for our souls. Other people, for really good reasons, can do it much longer than we can. And maybe some people go to their graves. I mean, listen, I work with sometimes, 80, 90-year-olds who, they are finally able to come to some truths that they always knew but couldn't allow themselves to really feel and acknowledge, right? It's just we're good at using defenses to avoid reality.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. You were in Splinterville. Do you want to kind of elaborate a bit further along the journey of what you've observed?
Yeah. So Splinterville, then the phase of disorientation. Some people go home. It's interesting. There are a few people who, even after some level of disorientation, they go back to, and this is kind of what we're talking about, and they're even more Calvinistic than they were. It's like, for some, it's they question some things, but then they've got some apologetic fodder to even be more sure of what they firmly believe. It's interesting. So some people go home, some people don't. Yeah. And then another station I talked about is some people say, this just isn't for me. They go to, live in the world. Some are spiritual. Like there was one person that I talked to who wrote a book, I think it was Deconversions. And then, this guy who was like so intellectual and smart and in a Christian community and asking these really bright questions. And then somebody, said, we need to like cast the spirit of intellectualism out of you. And he wound up leaving the faith, but he wound up getting to the point where he didn't have the triggers. It caused him to what he called sort of grow up in the world. Like, I realized that this was just almost like in a Freudian sense of the baby bottle. Like it kept me from growing up to being a human being with self-confidence and knowing who I am and knowing what I want. And so this kind of disorientation phase moved into a place of an incredible growth as a human being. And then he, in his story, was able to go to a church one day and just, well, I can appreciate this. I don't believe it. I'm not triggered by it. This is what this group of people is doing with the reality that they believe in. It's just not for me. There's another station of the Angstville, and that's where people can get stuck in the angst and the anger and the skepticism and the cynical. And there's research on the attitude of cynicism actually contributing to an increase of stress hormones, glucocorticoids, affecting our overall well-being, our physical health. But I
feel so attacked right now.
Right. But some people stay there. Some people stay angry. Listen, I was in Angstville. I remember, man, I was laying out some F-bombs in church, and I was trying to rile people up, and I was the rebel, and like, what happened to you? And what demons do you have? And I was pissed off, man. The church was freaking hurting me.
Yeah.
The doctrines were hurting me. Anger was warranted. But, there comes a point where sometimes staying too long in angstville is not only bad for the people you're around, but also for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, I think you mentioned this book. You have to forgive me. I read this book a week ago. My brain is just like, oh, we've read that. We've kept the bits of facts that we'll pull out at random at some point, but we've got absolutely everything else. But if I remember you rightly, you talked about this stage, because I think this is an important stage. But one of my observations is I've never found someone that wants to be there. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I found a few people that are well and truly loving being there and kind of kicking up a storm or whatever. But and the cynicism side of it, I don't know how. I think there can be healthy cynicism, and that's maybe more what I identify with than the anger and the rage. I've definitely had that season, but that was hopefully that's been and gone mostly. I don't plan on going back to that station. It's not good for me. Right. But it's fun though. I'm an anarchist, so it's fun. Right. But on the whole, in my experience, I get a lot of people, dozens of people every month coming to me going, I don't want to be so angry, so hurt, so upset. And a lot of people are saying, oh, you're just offended or you're just hurt. And I feel that's very unfair. It's writing me off or it's discrediting what I feel. But there's a truth to it that I do feel like that, and I don't want to be that person. Have you come across this kind of dynamic that's at play where people are going, I am angry and I am hurt and I don't know how to get out of this? I see people that get trapped in this place, that live in this station for years, quite literally, but don't want to be in that station. They're self-aware to see that they're there and that they don't want to be there, but they don't know how to leave the station. How do you buy your ticket out of Axville?
I know. Someone tell me the way. I would do it already. I think there are a couple of groups, but one definitely, we've heard victim mentality before. There are some people who, I've played the victim in my life at times. It feels good to be the one who was hurt. There's paradoxically a sense of power there. Yeah. There's a feeling of strength to play the victim and then maybe get some, extra doses of care and comfort in that state, but not everyone wants to be the victim. And there are people who genuinely, I don't know how to get out of this. And listen, that's people who come to therapy in general. Like, I don't know, how do I deal with this depression, this anxiety, this OCD, my relationship, I hate my partner. How the hell do I get out of this? But there's a dialectic here in that there needs to be a full acceptance of where people are. Someone who's angry, typically underneath that is just a whole lot of hurt. A lot of times anger is a secondary emotion covering up a lot of pain. Yeah. And one of the ways, so how do we get through our pain? And there again lies into the compassionate gaze of the other person, right? There's a difference in talking about your anger than talking about, I feel my whole world is turned upside down. I'm scared. I lost God and I lost so many friends and I feel so much pain. And then to have a witness, to have somebody to enter into that, we need to validate the anger. That makes sense. But can you talk about the fear and the hurt and the sadness and the shame? And then when people can enter into that with you, there's usually a beautiful movement towards healing and acceptance, and then the ability to forgive, and then the ability to move on. But a lot of people don't, it's not something, how do you do that, right? Yeah. Then you have the whole gender thing, which isn't always the case. Sometimes men are more aware of their emotions than women. But for a large part, then you have the whole, I don't know how to talk about my emotional experiences. Yeah. All I know is anger, shame, like sadness. What the hell is that? I can't even. Yeah. But that's a part of it, is being able to talk about that, process that with some people in your holy huddle, as I call them, unholy huddle. So that's a part of it, right? We have to allow others. It was people that hurt us, and paradoxically, it's people that are going to bring the most powerful antidote to some of the emotions that we're carrying around, right?
That sounds like almost goes back to that initial thing we were talking about with the kind of like the linking memories, linking associations. People hurt me, people heal me. Just reintegrating. Right. Actually, people are not the problem. People are actually the solution for me, right? As well, people are not the people that's not just my path of trauma, but it can be my path of liberation and restoration.
Yeah,
that's quite beautiful.
Yeah, and then in anger, it's not all bad. Use the fuel of anger in your life, not to poison yourself, but to use it towards liberation for yourself and others. Use that energy, right? But if it just stays in here, listen, you're not typically hurting the person who you keep having these negative thoughts about, right? Or the church this or the church that. They're going to want to sleep fine.
Yeah.
It's causing you deep pain. It's causing you more stress. Liberate yourself from that. Use that to get other people out of the matrix, right? Free people. Right?
It's really interesting to me. I see a lot of people that are in this place of being deeply hurt, and I don't think about this as much as I should, probably, given what I do day in, day out. But when I do talk with people that are deeply angry, deeply caught up in a very deep angst, you can see a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And I always try and ask, like, why do you think you're angry? What's going on? Can you talk to me about what caused this? What talk to me about your experience, and just try and open up to explore that a bit. But a lot of these people fascinate me. Again, I'm just fascinated by human nature. I don't know why I would be in another life. I would not be what I'm doing right now. I'd just be studying people nonstop under a magnifying glass. People would just be in MRIs constantly with me watching and asking questions. But I'm fascinated because so many of them keep going back. This thing of going home, but not. I don't want to presume why. I don't want to presume why, because I don't know why. But what I do see is I talk to the same people sometimes once a week. It's usually on a Monday, and it's I went straight back. And we have the same conversation of like, that's not healthy for me right now. It's just pain. It's just suffering. Maybe sometimes it's they just deeply need that acceptance from this group, but they're not going to get it. And we get to the point and they go, I know I'm never going to get accepted by it. I know they're not in that place. And then ding, you got a notification from them Monday morning, and you're like, I wonder what they got up to yesterday. And what's going on in that? What is it?
Stockholm
just a need, right? I mean, it's crazy, right? but these people that I'm talking with, they can acknowledge this, and I'm like, you realize, dude, you're going a bit insane here. You're just repeating this path, but they don't know. They'll hop churches, they'll try, they just keep going back in the hope that something new happens. Is it that this is that they're identifying with their victimizing?
I mean, in a more compassionate way of seeing it, it's like somebody who can't leave their abusive partner, right?
And that's the analogy I use a lot of times. It feels like an abusive person going back to a domestic abuse case or something like that. It's really horrible to watch. I've dealt with people that are going through that as well, and it's horrible. Yeah,
it's hard to let go of the good that you know to receive a greater good that you don't know. And it's scary. It's scary to leave the tribe that you knew. The security that you get is so incredible. I mean, it gets into our evolutionary tribal mind. Like, if we leave the tribe, we will suffer our demise. We will die in some way. It's so ingrained in us. That's why rejection is so powerful. It's so powerful to even keep us in the group, to keep us conformed, right? To believe these things, even if we might not. Because stepping outside into the unknown, into the abyss of the beautiful chaos of life can be so overwhelming for some people. And that fear and that lack of confidence remember, and I see this over and over again, one of the toxic things of religion is robbing people of developing a sense of self. That your self is wrapped up in a belief, an idea, or the pastor, or this person, or this group, and they're not encouraged to think for themselves.
Yeah,
they're encouraged to split off who they are, split off their desires. Oh, that's too creative. That's not okay, right? That's like me when I was in the Pentecostal church. You have to look a certain way, no facial hair. Don't listen to this music. I was told not to hang out with people who believe in the Trinity. It was a very boxed in, this is who we are. And it was scary to try something else. So a lack of confidence in the self, in a feeling of, I will be obliterated into the unknown. Yeah. God, it's huge. It makes so much sense why people would stick with the good that they know. So much compassion. It makes so much sense.
It feels like it's a systemic element of religion. Maybe bring it to what I know, Christianity. I don't want to say all religion as a whole, because I know that certain religions work very differently. But it does feel like it's quite systemic in that if I think about how I grew up in the church framed everything. First and foremost, my identity, who I was a Christian, a son of God. I was a church member. I was a deacon. I was a youth leader. I was a pastor. I was an itinerant minister. Whatever it was, my whole identity. Now, that feels like more and more of a bubble. The higher up the echelon you end up getting stuck. I work with a lot of pastors that are deconstructing, and I tell you what, it's not fun. It's just not a good place to be. I was in the church bubble when I deconstructed, and it was tough. But to be a pastor with a community, and you've gone out of high school into seminary, you've gone straight into a church, you've no transferable skills. Of course, you have lots of skills as a pastor, but it's not directly. Most people looking at your CV are going, or your resume, sorry, are going, yeah, I'm sorry, bud, we're not letting you be the CEO of this, regional bank. Or
exactly.
And you go through and you realize, gosh, who the heck am I? If I'm not a pastor, if I'm not, who are my family going to think I am? If I'm not this godly father and godly husband, if I'm not, where are my friends? If I'm not a friend to my only bubble is the people I meet day and systemically, we fill people's time with church, right? It's, you've got Sunday morning, Sunday evening, you've got youth on Friday, you've got prayer group on Monday, you've got home group on Wednesday, make fill. Oh, if you can, invite a couple of people around for dinner one night, and your 2 nights you have a week that isn't already filled with church, bring someone from church around, and and you realize I don't actually have friends with the people I work with. I've not got friends outside the church. And it just it traps you. It's kind of how cults work, and I've often been amazed by the overlap with cults and churches, in that there's a list of things that you have to tick to be a cult, but you have to tick them all. If you tick 5 out of 8, well, you're not a cult. You're just a weird group. Right. You have to tick them all. And what's fascinating to me is I can go through most churches that I've been a part of and go, gosh, you can tick 3 or 4 at least.
Right.
And so it does feel like we've got these systems in place with how Christianity works, that are just setting us up for failure on some level. Do you understand what I'm saying in that?
No, I do. Yeah. It's one of the biggest things that people have to do to reconstruct. Is, it's weird to say, but you have to kill all the gods in your life. There's something that needs to be done. There has to be a funeral for the authoritarian others in your life so that you can actually find the life that I would suggest God has for you to live. And that's a part of really what I would call just growing up. But some churches don't allow people to grow up.
Yeah.
Right. They just want people to be infantile. Let's have infantile messages. Let's, here are the boxes but people aren't allowed to grow up. And then they kind of force them to stay, because now I don't have the tools. It's like you would place me in another foreign territory where I don't even speak the language, I'd be scared to death. I wouldn't know what to do, where to go, who to talk to, or do I stay with the good that I know? Like, so you create a system where I need you. I need the baby bottle. I need it to survive. But that's the illusion. That's what I think. But it's this, that's the pill. That's the poison. That's what they pump into your veins. But that is the demise of authentic humanity. That is the demise of the beautiful, unique you, the beautiful, unique me that I am. So in Reconstruction, one of the tasks is to create a funeral for God. That this kind of God I have to put this God in a box, or this pastor, or this internalized other, just inner critic that I have that was always telling me what to do or how to do it. I have to bury these. And I have to be me, who God created me to be.
Yeah.
And I have to learn to walk on my 2 feet in this world. And as scary as it is, my God, it is the most. Listen, what is it? Bronnie Ware, the palliative nurse, worked with all kinds of people who were dying. She wrote a book. But one of the top 5 regrets that she saw, and she wrote about this in her book, is the people said, I wish I was who I really was. I wish I didn't have to hide, right? I wish I could just be myself. And I wish I basically chose to be congruent. That's one of the top 5 regrets that people have in life.
It's crazy, isn't it?
It's scary, but man, it's so worth it to be who you are, to be congruent. You're weird, quirky, creative, wild, passionate lover that you are, with all kinds of weird beliefs and different parts of who you are, and your parts that doubt God and love God, and wounded but yet healed parts, and fundamental parts and progressive parts. We're all a hot mess inside.
Yeah.
Let's embrace our inner family.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I mean, that's my journey coming out of I was traveling and speaking charismatic conferences and churches all over the world and doing that thing, and giving people the certainty. But for about 5 years of that, I didn't believe any of it. Didn't believe a lot of it. I didn't enjoy church. I didn't really believe in the system that I was a part of, the whole deal. But there was this dynamic of, I wanted to be a bridge. I kind of wanted to be there, and I could preach something that I authentically believed that wouldn't break everything for everyone else, but was enough that it would find the right people and would move them and would bring them forward. And maybe it was a step in the right direction for people that were still quite rigid in the system. And I really believe there's an importance to people that are in those roles. I think someone like Richard Rohr is a great example of someone that lives on the edge and brings people across the bridge. Probably less so in the last few years. He started to go, I don't care, I'm about to die in the next 4 or 5 years. He keeps talking about how he's going to die every time. And so he's like, who cares? Let's just do it. And he's been a lot more wild. Exactly. Yeah. But the universal Christ. But I have to say, it just kept, I didn't realize how heavy a burden that was. I really didn't realize until I came to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm going to I feel like I've gone as far as I can in bringing people that I had with me across. And I feel like the people that are left are not coming. They're not interested. They don't want to. And I've got all these people that I've brought across the bridge that are going, well, what now? I was like, I just got to go and enjoy myself. And the weight, I just cannot. I felt like weeping when I first I felt like coming out in a sense, or what I imagined coming out to be, of going, hey, by the way, I'm not that person you think I am. Oh my gosh, that level of not being authentic, not being yourself, not being free to say what you think. And of course that then burns the bridge down, right? There's not much of a bridge left for me at all. But I've come to the place where that's okay. There's other people functioning as bridges for different people in different places. But there is something profound. I think for me, that's the biggest reason I can't go back into the matrix. I can't put a mask back on for people to love. It's that concept of, if you wear a mask for people to love you, they don't love you. They love your mask.
Exactly.
You go home, take your mask off, and it's shining with love, and you feel utterly empty. And I feel for, one of the groups of people that I feel for, and I'd love for your input, because this is your wheelhouse, is people that have to put that mask on every single week, right? And they are in the station of being at home for the sake of their loved ones, their family, their kids, their wives, their husbands. But they're not there. You know, intellectually, they are off. They're off in another station. They're deconstructing, all these kind of concepts, whatever. They're like going, penal substitution, hell, screw these crazy concepts. But then every single week, they pop their mask on. They go to church. They do their thing. That must be really painful. But it's 1 day a week. It's 2 days a week or whatever. But the dynamic of living in that relationship, where some people that are in that can be open with their spouse, but even that, a lot of the people I work with people that are deconstructing and trying to connect with their spouse, but I also work with people that aren't deconstructing, going, I've come across you. How the hell do I understand how do I do this? And I've never come across couples that don't want to work it out, don't want to, they still love their partner. But I have seen a lot fizzle out, a lot of relationships end, and the hundreds of people I've talked to that are going through that dynamic, a lot don't make it. They don't. I'm very quick to go, I'm not an expert. I'm happy to chat with you, but I am no advice really. And a lot do make it, of course. A lot of people, love is powerful, right? I mean, it's beautiful. And go to marriage therapy, do your thing. I mean, sure, people you. How do you work with people that are going through this? I'm sure you see this dynamic of people that are on different spiritual paths.
Yeah, that's right.
They've made the choice to be tied together. We're stuck with each other. And you're making me scared, or you're holding me back, or at least kind of I feel a bit suffocated having to live that kind of spirituality out for your sake. Or
it's so, man, there's so many couples there's so many diversity of experiences, right? There's some couples that I work with where one partner cannot, they can't share their doubts, because their partner is so much on the fundamentalist spectrum that they're afraid they could even get abused. It's just weird. Yeah. But it's true. Because, while they're fundamentalists, they can be abusive. And then
you end up looking like your God, right? How will God respond to someone like that?
And, and they do tend to, the man is the head of the wife, and women should be submissive. And, that seems to be certain doctrines and teachings they pretty much like a lot. Yeah. Some couples, and this is a beautiful space where some can talk about their real experiences in the space where it doesn't get fixed, but they hear each other's hearts. And it's this liminal space where the beauty is in connecting in their diversity and even in their pain of diversity in regards to religious beliefs. But it's not in fixing either partner or getting the other partner to believe what the other believes. That is, I guess, the ideal experience that I do love to see.
Yeah.
And what's underneath that is a love for each other. There's a respect. But there's also the deep pain knowing that that's not who they originally married.
Yeah.
And they hold that intention, and they hold that with sort of an equanimity and a love and a kindness, but some with tears,
Yeah. Especially for Christians, right? Because you marry on the premise. I mean, for Christians, heck, above all these other parameters, right? You're funny, you're smart, you're beautiful, you're whatever. We've got similar goals in life, whatever. Above all of it, right? It's you believe in God, right? You believe this about God, right? You don't even go into that depth because there's only one way to believe about God, right? So that's such a core thing. And so suddenly for that to be whipped out, the fundamental, the main thing to just change overnight, which obviously didn't change overnight, but it feels like it's huge. Sorry, keep going with these different types, but it's such a huge thing.
Yeah, and what's the scariest part is the thoughts that come, well, if you don't believe in God, then you're going to start doing drugs and drink and cheat on me. The brain just goes there, right? Because that must mean you are hanging out with Satan, who's the father of lies, who's causing you to doubt God's word. But, there's an interesting place where, time goes and, she's still, or he's still amazing.
Yeah.
They're still loving, caring, respectful. They don't necessarily believe in God the way that I do anymore. And there is this cool acceptance where that you can come to. And sometimes there's, time can go by and one partner can get triggered and share, I feel today, I'm just thinking about church and I feel some sadness because we used to go together and now you're not. And then the other partner can say, honey, I get that. And I being sad makes a lot of sense. And I feel your sadness and I love you and I'm still with you. And this is just where I'm at and I can't help it. And so once again, it's that beautiful experience of vulnerability. But then there are couples who it's so reactive because once again, it brings so much fear. And those who have narcissistic tendencies, you have to be a carbon copy of me. And for you to doubt, well, that's causing me to doubt. And I'm freaking out. My anxiety is rising. I don't know how to articulate that and make sense of that. And I even acknowledge that. But I'm going to blame you as sort of, so you're the problem. This is wrong. You're listening to Satan and you need help. Get therapy. And you need to see a Christian counselor.
It feels like on some level it's easier to empathize for the person that is going through a little of this kind of deconstruction, whatever language you use, the spiritual kind of new emergence into something new. It feels like it's easier for them to empathize what their partner's going through because they were that, right? They could go, gosh, how would I have felt when I was in my prior state, when I was a bit more fundamental, a bit more religious, a bit more conservative, whatever language I use again. I would have freaked out. It's like, oh gosh, I don't want them to freak out. I don't want them to be scared. I don't want them to be, and sometimes they need a bit of hand holding to see that, right? Because maybe some people initially are just like, oh, look, Bob, I've realized we're both completely wrong and you're wrong and let's just fix it. And like, they're going, but generally speaking, with a little bit of help or self-reflection or introspection, they can go, gosh, that must be really scary for them. It feels like it's a lot harder in my conversations, and I haven't had obviously as many conversations with people that are partners of someone deconstructing just by the nature of what I do. But I have a lot of people that connect with me going, my wife said, can you talk to you or, whatever. And I'm just going, I just can't, it's such a disconnect because they live in such a world of certainty and security and their partner had that. Like they can't grasp why you would leave this certainty or why the answers don't work for their partner when they clearly work. That like 2 and 2 works. Why do you need it to add? Why do you not like 4? 4 is a great answer.
Right.
How do you think we can help people that are in that place? Because I like I said, I don't spend nearly as much time with these groups of people, but I think a lot of people listening to this spend a lot of time with those people, right? Because they're married to those people or they're their family, parents, kids, whatever. How do you think you go about, because it's easy to reverse engineer that empathy, right? You can go back to who you were and think, oh, that's scary. But it's very hard to make someone else kind of forward, move into another mindset that they've never had. And and obviously that sounds like something you do in those kind of relational kind of components. How do you go about helping them do that? Obviously listening and stuff is huge, I know. But
so we're talking about couples and how to navigate this territory, particularly from the viewpoint of the one who's gone through the DR journey. And I was just noting that sometimes it's important to be assertive, and sometimes it's not okay to continue to be barraged with questions uninvited or criticisms or feeling like you're constantly being judged. So being assertive is really important. Now, of course, we need to be conscious of any kind of domestic violence and, that needs to be taken in consideration. Assuming this isn't a DV case, being assertive is healthy. But I also think that, there's like I shared, a sense of brokenness that invites that level of compassion and empathy for their partner who's they perceive as still kind of in that conservative mode. And that can be really helpful, right? To think, I've been there. That makes sense. It's understandable. So I think having compassionate, being assertive when necessary, and just acknowledging the grief.
Yeah.
I mean, acknowledging the sense of loss that you may have, that you love this person and you've been on a journey with them, and now you feel a sense of distance because you so want them to join this in what you perceive as a newfound freedom, and they're not joining you in that. And that can bring an enormous amount of grief, and that grief is due to a sense of loss. So being able to be mindful of your own experiences when they come up, being assertive when necessary, being empathic. Listen, I always say to people, if you think you have more truth than the other person, my assumption is that truth is the person, and truth is Jesus, and truth is love, and truth is compassion, truth is healing. And so if you have more truth, then invite that space in how you treat your partner who's on journey. And that's going to, need patience and compassion and surrendering to the presence of the spirit and of love. I'm having a hard time loving my partner right now, right? And that's okay. And sometimes people do leave. They find, because what's fascinating is they become so liberated from this religious journey that they become liberated in other ways, with their sexuality, with their body, with new passions. And they're like, I can't, he or she's not coming with me. This just can't work. I'm feeling suffocated. And at some point they may eventually just leave.
Yeah, I see that a lot, certainly in people having to go, look, if nothing else, we need time. Like, you need to figure out your own journey and how you're going to come to terms with me going on my own journey. But this isn't going to work under the same house, under the same roof for now. Like, I've seen that a lot. And actually what's interesting is that seems to work out a lot better than sometimes people staying under the roof and just forcing to try and make it work. And so I'm very, very quick to try and go, there is no prescriptive method when you're working with another human being. There's no method of like, if you just tick these boxes, maybe you could come up with a method for yourself, maybe if you're lucky, but no way.
And then throw kids in that mix, right?
Oh, horrific,
and then
right?
that's, because
then you don't go, well, we don't want this dynamic where we're constantly fighting, but we don't want a dynamic where they don't have a mom or dad around as much. And then you've got, well, what are we teaching them, right? Because if you're still very fundamental, it's pretty damn important. We're teaching you something fairly fundamental. We don't want our kids to burn in hell. But if you're fairly liberated from that, you're going, I don't want my kids with some freaking religious trauma.
My goodness.
It's a very complex
The struggle is real.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to the other side of the equation for, let's say in that dynamic that there's a husband and a wife, and one of them is going, I am not okay with this. I'm struggling to grasp what's going on. How do they, but I still want this to work. I want this to work. What can they be doing? How can you communicate to them in that rigid kind of framework?
I try to be slick.
Things. You kind of slip in under the radar.
No, I try to appeal to the fundamentalist sensibilities of the priority and paramount nature of the scriptures.
Okay. If they get divorced, they'll go to hell. So you need to make this work.
Never that. No. That's not a bad strategy. That's not a bad strategy. Although Jesus did give an out, seemingly in one gospel for adultery, but appealing to the ethic of Jesus, right? In, let's say you consider her the, ungrateful and wicked, right? Let's look at Matthew 5. Let's see what perfect love looks like. Let's see how Jesus calls you to be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, who loves the ungrateful and the wicked, who sends the rain and the sunshine, right, on the righteous and the unrighteous. Let's see what Jesus has called you to do, to love and to be faithful to your partner, even though in your mind she's wayward right now. In your mind she's backslidden. What is the heart of the Father towards her right now? Let's imagine that this is the prodigal son, or now think of her as the prodigal daughter. What is the image of the Father? Can you remind me? I forgot. What did the Father do in that well, he hugged and he ran and he kissed and he was compassionate. Oh, is that what God's calling me to?
Wow.
So there's ways to appeal to the very text that they're to deal with someone they perceive as now. Does that last in the long run?
Sure, when you're dealing with those painful things day in, day out,
yeah,
take its toll on anyone, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's one strategy that I've appealed to.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was talking to someone this week who was a husband of someone that's deconstructing, and his wife was talking to me, and I said, look, if your husband wants to have him reach out, I'd love to talk with him or whatever. It might just be nice to have a third party that's kind of understands but is safe, because I don't really, at the end of the day, care about either of you. I do care about you both, but I don't know, you could not exist and it wouldn't, my life would not change. And so he did. He reached out and he started following me, and we talked quite a bit. But actually, he messaged me the other day and he said, "You've helped in talking with me. This is the story of my life. I'm not that helpful generally. So you were,
I doubt that.
You were a bit helpful, but actually, I found just reading the comments of people that are following you, reading the questions they ask you in the Q&As you do, just seeing them in their passionate pursuit of God, asking really genuine questions. I couldn't see my wife as passionately pursuing God and asking genuine questions. I couldn't see that. She was too close. But seeing all these people and realizing she's one of these people, he's like, it just opened my eyes to what's going on. And I don't agree with it. I'm really struggling with it. But it's just open. And so I was fascinated by that as well. I feel that's like cool. Maybe there's a dynamic as well where it's too close to home sometimes. It's too much. If my wife falls away and is going to hell, that's close to home, right? It affects my kids, it affects me, it affects you.
Right.
But if that homeless guy that's 4 streets down that I pass every Thursday on the way to work, if he starts falling away, I really want him to be saved. I don't want him to go to hell, but it's not. I can look at that a bit more objectively. I can maybe ask him some questions, or I'm not connected to this guy. It's just some guy I walk past, once a week or something. And I wonder if there's an element where we're too in it. If there's ways we can have people explore something outside of their relationships as well. Engage. I actually think something like your book, a lot of these books are probably very helpful for if you can get people to read them. It's really hard when you're in that rigid place, I guess.
Why would I read that? That's for infidels.
This is someone that's backslidden. This is another person with a problem writing this, but
you're right.
Keep going. Sorry.
A prophet's not accepted in their own hometown.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes it takes different people, different circumstances to cause people to change, right? To open up their minds a little bit more, their hearts a little bit more. And some people don't.
Yeah.
Some people do. And you're potentially pointing to those people who, they encountered someone, and sometimes it happens when they respect somebody, it's like this person, wow, I actually read one of their books and now they're leaning this way, or, I was listening to a podcast, and so all different messengers, right?
Yeah.
Circumstances.
Yeah. No, it's why it's been so good to see certain prominent figures come out and say, hey, this has been my journey as well. The people that you're writing me off as well. It's been very cool to see certain bigger celebrities, Christian pastors, or whatever, whatever it looks like.
Worship leaders.
They're all doing it, right? But what's interesting is, there's thousands of people a day leaving the American church for these reasons. But it takes, I read Joshua Harris's book, so it's a huge deal that he's done it. And I'm like, yeah, it is. I'm sure it's everything to Josh, I'm sure. But what it is to me, it's no different than that guy over there, Steve. But it's really helpful. Talk to me about your book, Mark. I'm really interested in. I absolutely loved your book, and I'm sure people listening to this are going, "Gosh, I want to read this guy's stuff." One of the things that fascinated me about your book is you do a fantastic job framing deconstruction and what's going on in the world and the ways that people go through that. But I'd love to talk a bit about how you see Reconstruction, because we talked about this a little earlier on, and it's such a touchy dynamic, because this is something I'm very aware of, is a lot of people don't want to reconstruct, or to talk about reconstruction is too presumptuous. How dare you presume I'm going to rebuild this thing called Christianity? I'm tearing it down. I don't want you to presume that that's what I'm going to then rebuild on. You know, I might sell this lot and go off and build something else. You know, I don't know. I think you did a really great job, you know, not being too prescriptive of when you reconstruct. It looks like this. How did you navigate that, or why do you think it's important not to be too prescriptive in those in that kind of world?
My goodness, this is what got us in this hot mess to begin with. Us listening to other people, how we should live our lives and view God, faith, ourselves. I refuse, when writing this book, to be that person.
Yeah.
Listen, I was in a cult for a few years. I have this very deep sensitivity. I'm sorry, I'm just getting emotional because
that's okay.
It's nobody should be there. Nobody should be forced or coerced or manipulated to live a different existence than that which they should be living, that which they're created to live uniquely as who they are, with their different personalities and gifts and callings. And I don't want to be, I'd rather help facilitate people coming to their own conclusions than me giving the conclusions for them. And there are times in the book where I say, this is the conclusions, some of them which I came to.
Yeah.
But I always preface it with, listen, everyone's, pitching their Jesus. I mean, hey, this is who Jesus is. This is who Jesus is. I'm just going to preface it with, this is who Jesus is for me. And I invite you into that story and take in the good and spit out the bad. Be congruent, right? And I even appeal to the Apostle Paul. His actual quoting Jesus in all of his writings, I think it was like, if you actually do the math, it was like 2 to 3%. So that tells me that the Apostle Paul took incredible liberties to be who he was in God, and not just directly quote people quoting Jesus, but found the freedom to actually sit in the presence of God and filter this information into his brain, his being, his psyche and spirit, and then say, this is what I think about God, faith, how it relates to my Jewish tradition. And so he did not quote Jesus a whole lot in all of his writings.
No.
So I take that as an encouragement, and just that on that vein of, I'm not going to tell you what to believe, how to believe. If this is helpful to you, I wrote this book to be wrestled with in community, hence the study questions.
Yeah, with the questions. That's why I mentioned earlier, I was bringing it up with people yesterday. I have a book club that we get together every 2 weeks. We've not done it as well over the pandemic. And they were discussing what book should we do next. And I'm like, guys, I have got a book. And so I think we're going to be working through it as a group potentially. And so
I hope so. And so I'm not asking people to reconstruct their faith. I'm asking people to reconstruct their life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That is, for me, that is huge. If that encompasses faith, God, that's really cool. Like I'm biased here. Yay, go God, go Jesus. That's pretty cool. But if your path takes you somewhere else, I'm at least helping you reconstruct your inner world, your emotions, how you use your defenses, your image of God, your image of yourself, of people, of trauma, of grief. The last chapter is focused solely on mostly values. Like, who are you? Like, here is a list of values. Who do you want to be in the world? Not who your pastor says you should be, not who they said God said you should be, but as you're sitting in the presence of love and yourself, who are you in the world? When you die, and let's say there was, on your gravestone, what would you want to have written on that? So regardless of all the answers to the mysteries of the universe and the divine that you have or don't have, live life the way that is congruent to who you are. And hopefully I help people to do that in this book.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful, because I think, you know, many people do walk a different path. They go into maybe more Eastern religions, or they may go into what is often termed the New Age, the demonic, scary New Age.
New Age sewage.
All these different things that we've been taught to be very scared of and wary of as Christians. But a lot of people go into agnosticism or atheism, and some people come full circle and go into some new resurrected Jesus-driven life, whatever that looks like.
Or Eastern Orthodox.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they go right into something a bit more liturgical and a little bit more traditional. Absolutely. And so there's this whole spectrum of people going into something. But I think what I love what you're saying here is that that's almost besides the point as far as what you're trying to help people do. Is you're not trying to guide what that looks like, but what you're trying to do is go, there's a lot here to reconstruct other than what you believe as far as your faith goes. There was so much wrapped up in faith that has also needed to be deconstructed. You know, you didn't just deconstruct your faith. You deconstructed a whole bunch of trauma, a whole bunch of pain, a whole bunch of suffering. You deconstructed your identity. You deconstructed community and friends and family. Like, we need to rebuild those things. You know, we can all agree that it's healthy for us to have a good ego, if only to lose it. But you know, let's build something that's yours.
Yes.
Let's have a family. Let's have a community. Let's have people around us that we love and trust and value. And so I love that aspect of what you did. I think you did it amazing. I think I said I wrote a little blurb for you, but I'm very, very hesitant to recommend anything that even mentions Reconstruction to my audience, because in my experience, 9 times out of 10, I don't know, I'm sure you've read a lot and looked into that world a lot. In my experience, 9 times out of 10, it is someone with even if they've reconstructed and deconstructed, they've got some form of rigid view now that they want other people to come into. It's not this open-handed, like, hey, let's take you on a journey to rebuild what you need to rebuild, which is what I'm all about. I often say, if I make Christians atheists or I make a Christian a Muslim, I'm happy. I don't mind, as long as their direction is forward. And that's heresy to the nth degree, right? Turning Christians into Muslims. I have to say that doesn't happen very often. But it's okay. But for me, I thought you navigated that so well. It's probably the primary reason that I would say I so recommend your resources, because the other stuff is easy to do in some sense. I don't want to say it was easy to write your book. Right. I couldn't have done it. But it's easy to talk about what people are going through and what they're doing. But it's very hard to create an open playing field where you give people practical steps to move forward and grow and develop, without prescribing to them what that should look like. That's an extraordinary skill. And so I think you've done a really beautiful thing there. And
may I share that's who I am as a therapist, right? Like, as a therapist, I'm not here to tell you what to do and how you should live your life. That would be, unethical. I mean,
right. Well, it's part of your.
Some people are very directive and, Tony Robbins-esque, if you will. That's just not me. It's very sensitive to people's journeys. And I'd rather just walk alongside you rather than tell you exactly what to believe and how to believe.
So what sparked you wanting to write this book? I'm really intrigued, because there are other books in this kind of field. What do you feel when you were looking at what there was out there? Obviously, for you to write a book, you think, I can do this better. I've got something to say that other people aren't saying, or whatever. What were you thinking? This is what's missing in this world. You're mentioning a lot of people that are writing books now as well. And honestly, you can have 100 books on the same topic, and that's a good thing, because people listen to different people or come across a different book at different times, need a slightly different voice. But I do personally, I have thoughts on what makes it so unique. But what do you think that you are bringing to the table with this book?
There are some, like I said, I think it's actual minimal, the amount of resources that are very specific to this kind of deconstruction and reconstruction journey. And I think there's some good ones. For me, Kathy Escobar's book is right on top of the list. I really appreciate it.
What's her book called again?
Faith Shift.
Yeah. Okay.
Very, very practical exercises, beautifully articulates. My goodness, I love the book. And she's accessible too. She just actually came out with a new book. But I think what I wanted to do was just be myself. But if one was to ask me what makes my book unique, is I actually try to integrate theology, philosophy, psychology, and spiritual formation. All those lenses is how I try to integrate, and kind of write this book. And so, I mean, there's a whole chapter on like theodicy, right? Like how to make sense of evil and how to make sense of petitionary prayer. And how do you make sense of, listen, if God is real and God is love, how in the world did God not say anything to me as I was freaking munching on this terrible, toxic religious stuff? Like, where was God in the midst of that?
Yeah.
And so that gets into a little bit of kind of process theology, process philosophy, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So I think integrating all those and weaving those in, and neuroscience, and I think that's hopefully that what makes the book stand out a little bit.
Well, I'm intrigued by that dynamic, because this is something I struggle with to some degree, and how I've portrayed teaching on certain topics has evolved over the years, where I'm much more open. I'll present multiple views, multiple ideas. I might have a fairly rigid idea in my own head of going, well, obviously I think that's the best idea. We all are going to pick something to be convicted of. But how did you navigate that, knowing that you were coming from a place going, I don't want to be, this is what you have to think, or this is the right thing. And if you just move from this belief to this belief, everything will be fixed. How did you go in? Was that a thing you were thinking? You sit down and go, right, I'm going to write about theodicy. Shit, how do I do this without telling people what to believe about theodicy?
Yeah. It's really simple though. I always preface it with, I feel like I'm walking on sacred and blood-stained ground as I try to articulate how I've come to see God working in the midst of evil and suffering in the world. This is how I've come to see it. And I don't want you to believe what I believe, right? I actually think that there needs to be a level of anti-theodicy, of we need to have the ability to protest. Like, what the hell, God? Like, even like, man, no one thinks about the insects and the animals. Like, compound that into the problem. My goodness. But, and I say this, and I must share. And because I kind of say it like this, everyone is sharing, including God is in control of everything. God, like I talk to people all the time. So if a woman is raped, do you believe that was the will of God? Yes. It was the will and plan of God. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. So I say to myself, and I say to my readers, I can't not say nothing. Even if I'm wrong, which of course I am to some degree, to not speak is actually worse than to speak. But if I'm going to speak, I'm going to do it mindfully and compassionately, and to not, this is my journey. This is what I've come to believe about God and evil and suffering. For me, it's the most plausible explanation right now. It could change, but man, my shifting into believing, what this means in trusting God and petitionary prayer and evil. How do I come to believe these things? There's hell, and it's been liberating. Like, so to get into the view specifically, to emphasize God's uncontrolling love, to put it simply, has changed and transformed my faith. That's the bottom line. So to believe that God is not in control, but that God is loving, and that at the same time God is non-coercive and doesn't force God's will into situations. Therefore, I appeal to God's very nature of love, that God can't do that because God's nature is love. Love doesn't coerce and force and have its way. As opposed to God can, but says, I'm just going to choose not to. Or I'm going to choose to do over here. Yeah, Susie's got leukemia. She's 5. Yeah, I'm going to heal. Oh, well, Sarah, she's got leukemia. She's sick. So now I'm going to let her.
Yeah.
I can't. No more.
It's wild, right? To even, it fascinates me. The whole concept of that just blows my mind. I often laugh as well, because even our concepts of free will, even to go, well, God creates this free will and lets you do what you want. And it's like, yeah, but he made you, he had you, created by this family in Iraq who were then bombed by, the Bush administration in the early 90s, and his whole family died, and then he met a terrorist who lived next door. It's like, he could have probably maybe had him born in, like Michigan. That might have been a better option. So on some level, God's still a total asshole, right? Even if it's free will, it's like, yeah, but you kind of didn't set him up for a great run. We can give you hey, you do what you want to do. God's giving you free reign, but he's put you in a minefield. Good luck, and he's put other people in a playground. It's still kind of unfair. And so people fail to see that at some point you got to take a step back and go, something's not right with the nature of God. He's a bit of a weird, twisted guy. Unless we start taking apart elements, looking at things. I like the idea of something like open theism, where you go, God just chooses to go, actually, hold on, I'm not going to live above this and, pull the strings. I'm going to just go in it and live it and not even know what happens next, but actually experience it all and work with you in it. That's exciting to me and makes a lot more sense. But it's a theological nightmare. Isn't it so important? Isn't it so important for those, well, at least this is what I found, that in the deconstruction, reconstruction journey, our image of God and how God works in the world is huge. Trying to make sense of that. And so my attempt to do that with some of the big issues that we experience, what does it mean to trust God again? Yeah. I believe this stuff hook, line, and sinker. So someone who's deceived doesn't know they're deceived. Yeah. Right. So how can I trust that God is this or God is this? So to me, to try to tackle those, I felt was really important. Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I just had Keith Giles on. I don't know if you're familiar with Keith. Yeah. But he has, I think he's got 6 pillars of deconstruction, he calls them. And so it's kind of like these 6 theological principles that he feels that you gotta take these down if you're going to do this healthily. And until you take these 6 pillars down and start, you can't then build those back up and rebuild. We might part ways somewhat on what should be rebuilt or not, but I actually really like his approach. Again, it's very hands off. It's like, hey, you need to rebuild what you need to rebuild. I love. He's a beautiful man. He's got a course thing that he does called Square One. It's fantastic. Great guy. But it is interesting because I do wonder sometimes. I think you're right. And I think people that start to deconstruct, it's like, okay, let's give people tools. This is what I try and do. Go, oh, you figured out that God's a monster as you understand him. What are some options, right? Let me give you 10 different options to explore and think about and look at. And I'll even tell you what I think are some of the best ones if you want to save you some time. But don't trust me because I'm an idiot a lot of the time. Someone might tell you what, if I look at my past decisions, I wouldn't trust this guy. Right. But I do wonder at times as well, looking at those people and those places. Did you read Megan Phelps's book, or have you watched her TED Talk? That she's the granddaughter of Fred Phelps, the originator of Westboro Baptist Church. Yeah. I did a long time ago. Her book is I was weeping through it because I loved this community. Oh, actually, I haven't read her book. Read the book. Honestly, it's like the 20-minute TED Talk that will just blow your freaking mind. I stopped hanging out with my family over Christmas because someone gave it to me and I was like, you're all dead to me because this book is amazing. Honestly, it was that's so cool. Really want to have her on because I think her insights are extraordinary, but the way she humanized her family. And I've seen this in the people I know that are stuck in very rigid, very fundamentalist, in my opinion, extraordinarily toxic beliefs. And I feel like there's a danger of me being presumptuous to assume that all those beliefs are inherently toxic for them right now. Not to say that long-term they may be causing damage or that there's better beliefs they could have, absolutely. But understanding that people can only really be where they are. And I think sometimes my early on in my process of deconstruction, you'll have your own process, obviously. In my process, it was to go into the Westboro Baptist Church and go, guys, you're idiots. What kind of moron God is doing that? You know, like, you obviously need to do this, and what about this, and what about that? And over the years, I've started to realize I'm yelling at a wall. I'm not making any difference. You know, you can go and share Bible verses with Fred Phelps. Fred Phelps has passed on, obviously, now, but like, he's not going to change his mind. Not anytime soon. There's going to maybe some Rory, and there's going to need to be some great suffering before anything kind of changes there, or maybe some great love. Maybe I should focus on being that person, not the suffering person.
Right.
But do you feel that there's potential? Do you feel there's potential for us to overstep our bounds in presuming what's unhealthy or healthy, or do you think there are from a psychological perspective, I'm sure you can go, no, some of this stuff is just really messed up shit that's going to screw you up for life. But do you think there is can you see that dynamic? Am I completely off the ball with this? I don't know. It feels like something.
I love what you're saying. And for me, it's important to, and this is the issue of some people who get out of Egypt wind up becoming the oppressor, which is interesting. And it could be as simple as, getting out of that particular faith, but then not seeing those people who are in it as really human. There's a sense of labeling and dehumanizing. Throw politics in the mix, forget it, right? You believe that you're for this president, you're not even human. You're dead to me. Yep. You're subhuman, right? Yep. And so it's sad that there's a loss, there's a dehumanizing, even for those of us who get out of, right, the oppressive Egypt. But so I think for me, I've always sought to keep that front and center, that whoever I am looking at, whoever this maybe fundamentalist or conservative Christian, that's a label, number one. Number two, they're human like me. They have dreams, they have hopes, they have fears, they have relationships, right? Let's not forget that we're human, right? That you're human, that the imago Dei must be within them too, right? Or where am I in my faith if I don't believe that, right? It's really interesting. But I think it's because in my book, I actually talk about, I think I list like 20 toxic Christian beliefs, right? But there again, I preface it with, this is what I consider toxic. This is my list. I understand you might have your list. So I think there's a way to be passionate about calling out oppressive doctrines.
Yeah.
Right. We have to have a place to do that, but I need to give that place to you too. Right. Yeah. And you might, what I consider toxic, you might consider treasureful. So,
yeah.
But
it's really tough because you know the line when, like it's like someone's abusing someone, someone's hurting someone, someone's beating someone or there's a huge inequality or injustice. You go, okay, let's call that out. But it becomes so much more subtle when it's a kind of a battleground of people's psyches.
And theology.
You know what I mean?
And what do you do, for example, and I've asked myself this guy has a family and he believes in eternal damnation. He believes that human beings, who they are predominantly, is sinful. Their righteousness is as filthy rags. They can do nothing good within themselves. They are in utter dire need of the grace of God. But let's take that sort of, hell-bound worm theology. Sometimes I say, you know what? They're entitled to believe what they believe. Like I said in the beginning of this talk, it's my family. They just have quirky. But then I say, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, that is from the pit of hell.
Yeah.
And then I feel angry and I feel sad and I feel like, oh my God, your kids are going to grow up with that.
Yeah.
And the research that I'm doing now about all these traumatized folks and original sin theology and hell and eternal, they could grow up like that.
Yeah.
and have sleepless nights and struggle with panic attacks and anxiety and low self-esteem and low confidence. And then I'm like, my God, this is toxic. This is a freaking virus. It needs to be eradicated. I must say something. So I vacillate between, oh, it's human. I know it's a different belief than I hold. I want to hold that space for you. And my God, don't you see what you're doing? This is toxic as hell.
You bounce between like Ram Dass and like Marley Monell. It's like the two extremes. Right. Of like, it's all good, man, and like, it's all bad.
I know. It's really,
it is because that cycle has to be broken, right? And it has to be. And slavery has to be spoken against. We can all acknowledge that there's certain things in history we're glad people were like, okay, yeah, we have been doing this for a while, and maybe we should stop. Like, someone should be stepping out and making, a change and breaking the cycles. And I think it's really challenging when it's more subtle, it's more accepted. It's much more, it's religious persecution, right? At the end of the day, it's lack of freedom of speech or all these kind of different packages we can put on it that say, I can, in certain frames of reference, it's saying, I can abuse my kid. It's my kid. I can abuse them. Right. And obviously that's very extreme language, but from a psychological level, potentially that's exactly what we're talking about, right? We're talking about engaging in some stuff that's potentially going to ingrain post-traumatic stress within this child.
But it's complicated, right? Because then I'm saying, well, I want you to be open to my view and to be, kind and respectful. And but then if I can get out of myself, I think, well, they think that my doctrine's from the pit of hell and that I'm actually poisoning kids' minds.
You're bracing kids to go straight to hell. Crazy.
Yeah. So it's really tough. So interesting. But I think really we can tough. Do it. And my sort of ethos, and especially online, hopefully I'm a successful majority of the time, is to be able to see the humanness and the image of God within the person and be very strong and witty and use logic to defend against what I perceive as toxic theology. Yeah. But I always try to be aware of, I don't want to dehumanize you.
Yeah.
But I will try to kick that doctrine's ass.
Yeah. It's very hard. I feel like as I've gone on my journey, I've associated with my beliefs a little less. My belief and my identity is less interwoven. Probably still very much is. I've no doubt about it. But it's a lot harder. So if you were to challenge me on something I said I believed, I'd be like, maybe, who knows? Yeah, good call. Whereas, and I'd certainly listen and I'd be open to some feedback. I might get a little upset. I might get a little bit defensive. I might even, change the tone of my voice as I respond, being a bit defensive. Maybe, of course. But you do that with someone that's a bit more fundamental, and it's a lot harder. We can go, oh, I'm talking about this belief you have. I'm not attacking you, and that's not true. You are attacking that person because they are their belief. There's this interwoven. Fused, yeah. Do you think there's things that we can do to kind of eke that out of people? From a more psychological perspective of understanding how people think. Is there a way that we can kind of help people pull those apart and see that we're not attacking them? You know what I mean? Like, is there techniques like Pascal's wager, these kind of like approaches? Is that something that you're aware of and try and engage with? You talked about working with a partner that isn't deconstructing, something like that.
Yeah. There's one way of looking at it and saying that it's in a sense narcissism. And narcissism requires, the identity does get wrapped up into this, the beliefs, me and beliefs were fused, right? The identity, the community, the sacred object, the sacred text. It's really hard to break people out of that. Once again, I think the tactic of Jesus is seldom used. I can't go there, but I wonder if calling people whitewashed tombs would work
Brood
for
of
some people.
vipers.
Right, you're on your father, the devil. Now, what's interesting is people say, I want to be like Jesus, and that is a tactic that he did use for extremely religious people. But I just, it's not my personality. But I do wonder if that would work on occasion.
Might get you shot, the modern day equivalent of the cross.
Yeah, but what we do find, and this is through Heinz Kohut's work on kind of narcissism and how beliefs and fundamentalism is intertwined with texts like that, it's sort of this weird, relentless empathy, right? That no matter what you throw at me, I will humanize you. It's sort of like that passage of heaping hot coals on the person's head. How? By loving them, right? And so sometimes love has this effect of feeling very uncomfortable for people. But I mean, listen, there's no guarantee, right? But we do know that sometimes if you go in strong, it only solidifies their belief as a prophet of God.
Yeah.
But sometimes being subversive with love and wisdom and kindness can help kind of soften some people's hearts.
Yeah.
But there's just some who's going to, like you said, what Fred there, went to his grave believing what he did.
Yeah, well, maybe there was a whole thing where he was out on the streets. You know how they have the house across the road from them that was the gay house, and it was like rainbow colored, and it was gay people that lived there, and like it was a big deal. Apparently, in the last few months, he went out on the yard and he was yelling at the house. He was saying, "God loves you too. God loves you. You're good people. You're good people."
Oh, come on. Really?
And that was hush-hushed. It was covered up. They denied any of it ever happened. They wouldn't let Megan and her sister visit the grandfather. They put him in a home immediately and shut down any access to visit him. So it was maybe some form of dementia, a lot of things going on. But you're like, man, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow,
possible, right?
Who knows what's going on there? But so I have no idea. But and that to me, I'm like, wow, you look at someone like Megan Phelps and you go, hey, dude, if you can be brought up in that, and what helped her, the TED talk that she does on how do you reach people like me, people that are like full blown in a cult. How do you reach me? The question is. The answer is you love me. You show me kindness. You engage with me on that level. Beautiful story. And it's not always the answer. Sometimes it is yell at them. You whitewashed tomb. I don't know. That works for some people. But the dynamics at play, I'm always fascinated by the Westboro Baptist Church. There's a guy in there who was a journalist, and he went to Westboro Baptist Church to do a paper on them. He was going to write for the paper about this crazy, insane cult. He's an atheist. He goes in, he gets saved, and he's now a part of the cult. And he's been a part of the cult for like a decade now. And you're like, what? And you just realize, actually, this is something that fascinates me. I love watching documentaries about cults. I watched the Waco remake. There was like it wasn't a documentary. It was like a dramatization of it. 2018 is fantastic if people haven't seen it. If you've not seen it, it's worth watching. I was told it's on Netflix, but I couldn't find it on Netflix.
Oh, interesting.
But I also watched Wild West Country, probably the best documentary I've ever seen. God, that was gripping. I watched these cult documentaries. The Path on Amazon, or I think it's on Hulu in the US. The Path is an amazing drama about a cult. And unfortunately it got canned at the end of season 3, so there's not much resolve, which kills me. But it was amazing. And I watch these things and my wife laughs at me, but I'm like, God, I want to be a part of a cult. Like there's this thing in me that just draws me in. And I'm like, this is so, you know what, if we could tick some of these boxes, but maybe not the one, let's kill people that try and leave, or, let's, I don't know, try and poison the neighboring town that disagrees with us, or whatever, like kind of crazy. We don't let people leave. Oh, maybe we should sleep with all the women and like have celibacy amongst all men apart from one guy. It's like, okay, right. You lost me there. And what's amazing is how many people you don't lose at that point. It's astonishing. But there's something in the dynamics of these close-knit, beautiful communities that are loving, that are amazing families. There's something about them. Maybe I'm a psycho. I don't know. Maybe you don't know at all what I'm talking about. But I can't help but watch these things. You watch the first episode of Wild West Country, and I'm like, dude, I'm in. I'm moving to Oregon. I'm going to be part of this awesome hippie community. It sounds amazing. What is that? What is it that draws us to that?
It's paradise, man. I mean, look at that Wild West country, right? People were just like in seeing utter bliss.
It
Like
just looks amazing.
community and working together, and like, you know, there was some kind of free love there, and, you know, I'm sure wonderful sexual experiences. But look at the dancing, right? The free flowing, not giving a damn, ultimate freedom, full desires, sensuality, just experiencing the moment without judgment, without judging you. God, there's something animalistic yet liberating about that kind of environment.
Yeah.
But, you know, underneath the scenes too was a whole bunch of
really scary things.
You know, it wasn't as paradisic as it could be.
Do you think there's something about, I wonder, you know, because there's all these different dynamics that we can go, you know, what is that? What's going on? But there's something about it that is deeply human as well. It's deeply, almost, you know, we can have these moments as humans where we go, this is what life's about. You know, we get together with friends, we have a beautiful evening, we laugh, we cry, we share our pains and our joys, and we have an amazing time. And you just know this is what life was for. You know, I don't care about my work, or, you know, I don't care about this or that. It's just this, or you have times with your kids or whatever. And it feels like there's elements when I'm watching these kind of cultish things play out. I haven't been a part of a cult. Maybe some people would say I have different affiliations I have in my past, but I've been a part of churches where I've felt that, you know, and that's maybe part of what draws me into those elements. And yeah, there's then the negative things that, you know, you start to look at and go, I don't like that, I want to leave. Do you think there's something in that we're almost called to, that we need to be as humans? You know, if we can look at this journey of deconstruction, reconstruction as some form of evolving, of growing, of developing in spirituality, hopefully moving in a positive direction, is part of that direction building some form of community? Is there a structure around this that is healthy, that is good? Or do you inherently just go, no, it feels a little bit like that last thing we were a part of? I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah.
How we're wired as humans, is that kind of a needed thing? You know, we talk about that tribal element. We're made to be in communities of 150 people or so. You know, we're not made for mega churches, but we're not made to sit in their house alone on, you know, on lockdown or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, when we ask the question, when do we feel the most alive? And I think a lot of times people say, I mean, it's so different. Like here again, you know, when I'm on the top of the mountain and I'm looking down and it's like, you know, no one's around.
Yeah.
But there's about that human connection, about human, like we're wired to belong from birth to earth, from the cradle to the grave, from womb to tomb, right? We need other people, and our nervous systems are wired to belong and feel that sense of connection. And there's something beautiful about it. I think the times when I'm most alive personally is sex is good, orgasm is great, but it's human connection. It's like connecting with you on a human level where, you know, it's not about paying the bills. It's like I'm lost in my conversation with you. It's something I'm passionate about. I don't feel judgment from you. I feel connection. There's something beautiful about that. And why it feels so beautiful is because it's so uncommon. You know, when you're in the hustle and bustle, when you're taking care of the kids and you got to pay the bills, to have this, I mean, sometimes therapy is the professionalization of friendships. It's like, oh, well, this person's listening to me.
Yeah.
How many people do you have in your life that zero?
Yeah.
Like, God, we're aching for just human authenticity and witness. But I will say that there's a pull for that, but then a push of you're too close. I need my space. I need some sort of autonomy, because as much as people want to be close, people don't want to be as close as they think they want to be.
Yeah. Do you think that's where a lot of these things go sideways? With it's too close knit, it's too vulnerable, it's too, you know, I need a bit of space, I need some modicum of safety. Because in you saying that, I'm like, yeah, I can definitely see that actually as a part of our dynamics at church, our dynamics in these kind of cults as you observe them. Like, there's definitely part of that. This we're all one, but you know what? I need a bit of identity outside of the oneness. This kind of our marginalized kind of humanity.
Yeah. Well, I think that. I think you think that, but I think my perception, being in a cult, you're so fused with the community that it becomes more, it becomes more communalistic rather than trenched, Western individualism.
Yeah.
Certainly in other cultures, they have this collectivistic mindset, So, yeah, I think for the most part, there's just this fusion with the one.
Yeah.
Like it's we. It's like not even I. Like you see the people working their butts off, and they're smiling. They're smiling, right? Like working in the sun, doing this hard labor, building these houses, and they're like they're not high on drugs.
No.
They're high in being a part of this community that transcends even themselves, right?
Yeah.
For a grander purpose, to be the light of the world.
And I want to go build a house with them now. You know, I mean, it's infectious, right? There's something about it that draws us. I don't know. I'm an extreme introvert, so I actually really, really don't like being around people a lot of the time. But my wife laughs. I work in my office for like probably 12 hours a day on and off here and there. And I'll go and hang out with her for a few hours and go, I kind of want to be alone now for like a little bit because I'm tired. I get really burned out fast, but I'm desperate to be around people a lot, like constantly. I'm like, let's get our friends together. Let's hang out. Let's do stuff. So I'm constantly swinging back and forward. But yeah, there's something about it. There's something about being part of something, I just think it fascinates me really. And I think this is what, the amount of studies I've seen on people that are de-churched, deconstructing, leaving their communities. The number one, I think I posted today, what did you grieve the most when you started to deconstruct? And people were posting on Facebook and Instagram. And I knew what was going to come up. I just wanted some to see how people worded it, what they looked at. But I knew the number one response. You know what the number one response is? The community. They lost their friends, their family. They lost God. Yeah, they lost their own identity. They lost their certainty. They lost a lot of stuff. You could list things you lose for hours. You list them in the book. A lot of things. But the community is the biggie. It's being part of something, having people that listen, having people that understand, having people that are doing it with you. It's huge.
Yeah. I mean,
it's hard to do as well. As far as what we're doing in deconstructing, where do you go to find other people that are deconstructing, right? That's why I built the Deconstruction Network, so people could find people in their area, because you leave the Baptist church because you are now a bit more charismatic. You know where to go. Go to the charismatic church, right? Or vice versa, right? I know where the other charismatics are. I'll go to the charismatic church. So I'll work my way through them. But you leave a church because this isn't doing it for me anymore, and I'm not sure I believe in this, and I don't really want to get together and do this kind of weird dynamic of what God is. I'd rather do, what do I do? Where do I go? Where are people like me going? We don't know.
Yeah. And at some point, people, they leave your network. It's like, all I hear about is like deconstruction and faith and this and that, and this loss and grief, and okay, I'm at a different place now.
Move. Yeah. Yeah. It's really.
And then they hopefully find people that are in the station where they are, right?
Yeah. Do you think we have to live with people at the same station? Or maybe not have to, but do you think that's the most healthy way to live?
Well, there's healthy, and then there's what brings the most comfort. But what always brings the most comfort may not be what's most healthy, right? So, I mean, I would encourage people to hang out with people in all different stations, all different walks of life, right? And at the same time, for you and your journey, you might find the most comfort in not being around this group, but being around this people, because they help you feel they help you feel normal. Yeah. Like you're not crazy. Like, oh my God, you believe that too. There's that, universalizing. If you feel okay You don't feel crazy out of your mind, heretic, you're going to hell. And there's something really comforting about you believing similarly to me.
Yeah.
Is that healthy? It's healthy. And, you might also hang out with people in station 4 or 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And actually that could help you get out of maybe a rut you might find yourself in, or learn a lesson or two here or there. But hang out with all kinds of folks.
Yeah, because that's something when I started the network, my heart was, people get messaging me going, do you know anyone in Cleveland? Do you know anyone in Chile? Do you know anyone in London? And I'm like, yeah, but I can't remember who they are, and I'm certainly not going to be able to put you into touch.
Right.
So I was just like, right, I'm going to put a map on the website where you can just put a dot where you are and then find people. And that's been really helpful. And people have found each other all over the world. It's beautiful. But what fascinated me, I knew this, but I didn't think it through, is I picked I didn't care what it was called. I was like, how do I frame this in a way that will attract the people that need it the most right now? So I was like, deconstruction, when you're in that place, it's the most lonely, I think. And so I'll call it deconstruction network, whatever, we can rename it later, and it'll probably be a nightmare to rename now. But what's interesting is how many people are in a very different place but would identify as deconstructing it. And so what I found was that, you can click on LA today and it's probably 40 people in LA. And so you can go, amazing! Oh, I can finally connect with all these people. But what's interesting is if you're deconstructing in a certain way, you can click through every single one of those people and send them a message and say, hey, do you want to connect? And you can go and meet up with them for coffee, and you can walk away going, God, I don't want to hang out with any of those people ever again, because they're deconstructing in a different way, or they're at a slightly different station, or do you know what I mean? And then there's people that are in a different place and go, but that's actually what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something a bit different. It feels like, is there something that we can do when we're deconstructing that softens us to that? Or do you think that's just part of the journey? We are quite rigid and black and white, maybe at the beginning stages of deconstructing.
I think this is something we haven't talked about. And I don't know if this is a side thing, but I think part of it too is we're grieving something different than we think it is. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, but sometimes we think our issues that are going on, our struggles, our emotional, spiritual, it's because of the church. But sometimes it's about other things in our life. Like there's this defense called displacement. And I know for me, I was angry at the church, but if I was honest, I was angry because I was never parented by my parents, right? So it's almost like this transference, like this projection where the church is the surrogate mom and dad. And I'm going to pour my angst on the church as they're symbolic of the parents that I never had. So I'm really grieving more than the church, but the church becomes a scapegoat. It's a really interesting dynamic, not talked about a lot. And it's not in every case, of course. But sometimes the church can be a scapegoat for, you're grieving trauma, early childhood trauma, right? Childhood from, abandonment from your parents, or you tried to be successful in a career you never could, right? Or relationships failed many times, going through this divorce or this breakup, or, just maybe lost somebody, an uncle. So all these things, it could be churning in there. And I'm just going to, the church this, and this pastor this, and this. And sometimes it's more than that. And sometimes when we meet with people, it's like, this was good, but I'm still feeling empty. There's still something this is it, but this isn't it. This isn't hitting what I really need emotionally and spiritually. Yeah. I'm just throwing that in there. Sometimes it's interesting.
That's huge. I'm just thinking about myself, probably in the midst of my deconstruction, I was married before my present marriage, and that obviously didn't go well. I'm not a polygamist. And I went through what was very painful for me, knowing and experiencing life. It was probably a very, very healthy and good divorce as far as things go. But it was very painful for me. I didn't want to get divorced. I was, especially because I was in ministry and I had a lot of my identity was wrapped up in just being married, not even in the marriage, but just that's an identity to some degree as well. Of like, I'm married. if I'm divorced, that's a totally different identity as a minister, as a as a leader, and so there's all sorts of different stuff in that. But I often think about different pains and sufferings I have that I'm not as in touch with my emotions. I've got something called alexithymia, which means I don't know what my emotions are. I have to kind of reflect upon. So I can be red in the face and throwing things. I don't really get that angry, but I wouldn't know I was angry. I'd have to literally stop and go, wait, I'm throwing things. I'm red. I'm hot. Oh, I'm angry. And about 10% of the population have alexithymia to some degree. And I probably have it a little stronger than many people. So it's quite hard for me to engage emotionally a lot of time. And actually, through the process of divorce, it was through going to marriage therapy, the clinical psychologist we were working with was like, Phil, I think you've got alexithymia. You maybe want to look into this and kind of do some work in like trying to connect with your emotions.
Right.
But my point being, one of the things that I often wonder about is how some of these things, my relationship that failed, or maybe my relationship with my parents, which I think alexithymia can be a physical element. There can be physical elements within the brain that cause it, but a lot of the times it's linked to early childhood trauma and things like that. So I'm like, okay, how did my early childhood maybe link to this? But I often wonder, I probably spent 10 years in church knowing I'm not going to be in church much longer, but making it work. Can I make this work? Can I really make this work? And a huge part of that, I wonder, is in reflection, was it some level of displacement of me not being able to deal with the fact I couldn't make my marriage work, and I wanted to make it work, but it didn't work, and I couldn't, and that kind of and stuff like that. You just don't think, that's not something I would just through my own introspection. I'm not qualified enough to kind of come up with such an amazing concept or theory. It does require someone with some insight to be able to look maybe from the safety of a third person, just observing, but also having understanding of the dynamics of what we do as humans. And so, I think I recommend therapy so much to people. If I had a licensed therapist that was giving me a referral fee, I'd be a millionaire. I could retire. But it's such a huge deal, I think. Do you think, would you concur? I know you're very biased in this, but do you think with the amount of trauma, and I know not everyone has trauma, at least certainly not to the same degrees, but with the amount of psychological kind of torment that this does cause, do you think that kind of therapy coming alongside with someone that's trained and can maybe walk you through some of these pains and sufferings as you go through, would you recommend that as a path for a lot of people?
Brother, I'm biased. But listen, it's hard to be your own therapist. Yeah. You could be someone like yourself who, I'm going through the world and I don't even realize there's another hidden world in there. Yeah. Either called the unconscious or simply my feelings that I'm not fully aware of, that is in some ways affecting how I interact with myself and others and with God. And there's some research on that too, how our early childhood relationship with mom and dad affects our relationship with God. But it's, we need other people. And in this context, having a trained, compassionate other who can help navigate this alongside with you can help you put words to things that you've never thought about, ask questions you never thought about asking yourself. I mean, it's priceless. It really is, Phil. It's I've done my own work as, I've gone through significant trauma in life. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process. You just got to find the right person. Sometimes it's hard enough in itself.
Are there, talk to me about this a bit. I know we are getting on for time, and I want to be sensitive if you're on your side thinking, crap, I've got to go. But we will wrap up. But I'm really intrigued by this as well. So I have my own kind of makeup that makes therapy quite hard for me. So alexithymia is hard to work with. I also have aphantasia, so I don't have I can't visualize things in my head, which is a fascinating condition. It's much more rare. And those two combined are a bloody nightmare, because almost every therapy that's used to work with alexithymia is to go and visualize a past memory and then try and figure out how you were feeling, like observing it. I can't observe it. I can't picture. I only learned about it 3 years. It was 3 years ago. I was talking to my wife and she was like, oh yeah, I was watching, I was thinking about this time when I was a kid and I was wearing this and I was talking to my parents and I'm like, how do you remember all those details? And she's like, well, I just see it. And I literally, I wept. I was so crushed that people can watch their memories. I was like, my mom died and I can't picture what she looks like. I can't do that. I can tell you the data. I think that she had brown hair. I can tell you what her face was like, but I can't picture that. And I'm like, you're telling me I could go back to when I was 6 and relive? I know, not everyone's quite like that. I can hit play on a cassette tape and watch my childhood. And so that's complex. And so there's an element where people have different makeups that would determine different therapy types, ACT, CAT, CBT, whatever. But in that, I also know that certain therapy types are helpful with certain conditions. And so people that are working through specifically religious trauma, is there specific therapy types, when they're looking to pick someone that's a therapist, that you would recommend, hey, here's a good starting point, at least these kind of couple of disciplines to be working through? Or maybe not, as well. I'm kind of just asking.
No, it's a great question. I think first and foremost, to find a person who knows what you're going through. I mean, so many therapists, there's a big kind of push for multicultural competence in the work that we do. But one of the neglected areas, and this is, researched as well, is spiritual competence, working with spiritual or religious clients. So it's an opportunity of growth for a lot of therapists. But having a therapist, ideally, who's gone through this journey is man, that's going to be huge, right? Or if not gone through the journey, maybe a Christian who's lived life a bit, who has experiences, who has worked with, people who've gone through religious trauma. In other words, you don't want to find somebody who just doesn't know much about it.
Has no idea what's going on.
Because it's hard it'll be hard to relate to them in a really deep way, although it's possible to some extent. But ideally, if you can find, so that's number one, finding somebody who's done this kind of work with people. Yeah. But two, as far as a model of therapy, I think going back to, stay away from talk therapy. And what I mean by that is find an approach that's experiential, that takes the body seriously, that is trauma informed, that maybe is read, Bessel van der Kolk's, The Body Keeps the Score, is understanding of how trauma affects us. Yeah. And there's multiple approaches that one can look at.
Sure. Yeah. On that first point, I'm fascinated as well, because this is something I really struggle finding the line in this, but there's a whole world of quote unquote therapy that is less driven by its core ethic. And so you'll find that there are certain paths you can go down when you look at therapy, where you stumble into a world where the therapist is a Christian and has an agenda on some path. Well, and if maybe they genuinely feel a conflict of going, well, I know I shouldn't be getting involved, but this person's going to hell, or they're working through it. But actually, I find there's a whole world in there where maybe they're not actually licensed professionally to the same standards, or they don't understand kind of that dynamic. That happens. But I know a lot of Christian therapists that are pastors, right? That's my kind of dynamic. But even I've come across people that have gone to professional licensed therapists with doctorates in therapy who are Christian, and it has been a very, very bad ride for them. And that's not common, but it happens. And so I'm often trying to explain this to people. You need to find someone that's got some sort of world of experience in this remit, because it's really, this is Winnell's big thing, right? She bangs that drum constantly. No one understands this. People need to understand it. People need trained in this. So you need that, but you want to avoid Christians like the plague in some way, shape, or form as well, right? On some level, you can understand what I'm saying. I don't mean all Christians, but
that's a conundrum, right?
Yeah.
Like I want to go to someone who understands. Most likely, I'm assuming they'll be Christian, but I don't want to do Christianity right now. Jesus, is he going to give me he or she going to give me a Bible verse? Or, this is, and I have to, up front in the informed consent, we have that conversation. And some people right up front share their concerns. hey, Mark, I read your website. I know you're a Christian. I also know you're an ordained pastor. I got to be honest. It was that fact that we didn't even want to come. We were kind of nervous. We came, but we just want to make sure that you're not going to kind of force your and we have that conversation. It's very cool. And it's
are there red flags people can look for? Because I know that sort of world is a very gray area where there's all sorts of accreditations people can claim that aren't really the same as going to someone that's maybe a bit more accredited, and they may find themselves bleeding their own personalities or opinions into things more than someone that's gone through the training to understand that's not how therapy works. You shouldn't be doing that. Obviously, you could probably only speak for the American kind of world.
Right.
I wouldn't want people in Europe to be following, because I know that there's different terms, even psychologists, therapists, and all kinds of different language. But what would be things that people definitely want to keep an eye out for and avoid when they're looking for something like that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the States here, there's ethics, there's guidelines, there's, you have to shoot. For me to be a therapist, I had to do 3,000 hours before I could even take the tests to be licensed. It's very, very, very strict. So it's not like in other places where there is less guidelines and rules and structure around it. And, hey, I'm John, I do therapy,
Yeah. I did a weekend course online.
Right. And that does happen. So, for us, we have the blessing of, well, hey, are you licensed?
Yeah.
It's a great question to ask.
Right.
So, licensing, sometimes there's reviews online about people. Word of mouth is always cool.
Yeah.
It's just, it's hard to tell. The beautiful thing, though, is if you don't feel a connection in the first session,
walk away, right?
You're in control. There's no contract here. This is you charting your own destiny. And if that first session you didn't feel connected and that there was some rapport building, try someone else. Now, another caveat is if you try the 10th person, it could be something about you and just scared the hell scared of intimacy. So, right. But those are a few things.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Mark. We should probably wrap up, because if anyone's still listening, I mean, they've got the fortitude of us.
Listen, I'm thinking like you're coming for dinner. Like we've been.
I love it. This is, but for me, this creates such richer, deeper, more interesting content than a quick 40-minute podcast where people go, "What's your book about?" Where that's it.
Beautiful.
It's not. No one's going to know you quite like they'll know you through this chat. But
I 100% believe that, Phil. I feel so privileged to be here having conversation with you. It was brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for making time. Not everyone, most people are daunted when they hear I want to chat to them for a couple of hours. Oh God, how am I going to keep talking? Right. How can people keep this conversation going with you, engage with you? Obviously, you've got your book coming out, and is it next week, the end of next week?
It's next week. Will this come out after next week?
Yeah, I think it will probably come out next week, or it might be the week after. So your book is out. People are watching this, and your book is out probably. Good. Just for that.
I love this, and I love to interact with readers. And so if you purchase the book, I love to hear experiences. What resonated with you, what didn't. Send me an email, and that would be.
Is that the best way to contact you, through email, through your website or something? Or
that would be the best.
What's your website?
Well, there's two. My therapy website is markgregorykarris.com, but I don't have a website for this topic, but my conspiringprayer.com is, a little feisty and more has to do with theodicy and petitionary prayer.
But if they go, they'll be able to find you. And are you on social media and stuff? You on Instagram, Facebook?
Just Facebook.
Oh man, Facebook, man.
I know. I have Twitter somewhere. I don't use it a lot.
I have this conversation with everyone, man. I'm like, come on, guys, you're gonna die out with all the grandpas.
I know.
Okay, so Facebook is a good place. And it's just Mark Karris. Is that how people can find you if they want to connect there as well?
Sure. Yeah, perfect. I love it.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I'll hunt out the links and make sure I've got them right, and I'll put them in the show notes itself. But dude, this has been a privilege. Honestly, you're such an incredible incredible human being with just such an amazing heart and such profound wisdom, which you're bringing from multi-disciplines. You know, your background as a pastor, but also your background as a therapist, and you're very well studied. You know what you're talking about. You've done the work. You know, I love a book with some actual, like, you know, references in it, and I'm like, wow, yeah, you've read this book. I read that book. That's cool. That makes me feel better, at least.
Awesome.
I found myself adding so many books to my wish list that you just mentioned in passing. I'm like, I've never heard of that book.
Very cool.
Cool. You're doing an amazing thing, and honestly, I think this book is
appreciate that, Phil.
So helpful for so many people.
I hope so.
Really appreciate. All right, have you got another book in the back of your mind? You gonna be doing something else, or
it's called finishing my doctorate.
Oh yeah,
I'm in my dissertation right now, so I've got to finish that.
What are you working on? What's your thesis that you're working?
It is looking at shame, self-criticism, and self-compassion with trainees. So trainees who are affected by shame, self-criticism, self-compassion in their first year of practicum.
Wow.
So it's, you know, it delves into topics, you know, shame and self-compassion, and is work that I'm very passionate about.
That's good work.
Yeah.
Good
so
work.
I look forward to when it's done.
It's my number one thing I try and work on.
We didn't talk about self-compassion.
Right, let's have you back on and we'll talk about self-compassion at some time.
All right, Phil. Yeah,
give us a couple of months and we will talk, because honestly, that's my jam. Is I've got books and workbooks, and most of them are empty because I don't do it enough. But oh my gosh, I am the least compassionate human being on myself. I am so compassionate. You come to me with the problem, you come to me screaming and yelling at me, I'm like, compassion. Right. I forget to put the oven on at the right time, and I am gonna beat myself up for an hour. You know,
Listen, Phil, treat yourself like the Father of love would treat you, and not the Father of lies. Okay, my friend.
That's it, dude. Just treat myself how I would treat everyone else.
There you go. Let's keep it simple.
I'm just mean to everyone, to myself and no one else. Yeah.
Well, we'll have a therapy session.
Dude, that would be beautiful. All right. Well, all right, dude, Phil. Thank you so much, and we'll definitely stay in touch, and I'll let you know when this is live. And
very cool. Thank you, Perfect. Phil. Brilliant.
Awesome. Love you, man.
Take care, brother.
Have a good one.
Same here, man. You too.
Ta-da.
Bye.